If you want to grow a business from 100 to 500 million, you've got to be smart, you've got to be tactical. I'm a man that likes irons in the fire and options because not everything works, so you don't want to bet the house on anything. Be really disciplined about stripping out the stuff that isn't working, because otherwise you'll spend money on it when you should be pouring fuel on the fire of the things that are working. We had a chocolate milk product at Tony's. It was a nice food service business. I was like, we have to get rid of this. Innocent Veg Pots, that was a 8 to 10 million business, and I closed it. I've never seen a market get to any meaningful scale within 3 years, and typically within 5 years. And there was kind of like, everyone looked at me like, you're insane, there's gonna be a riot. I don't believe in simplify to amplify. By adding a certain amount of complexity in your business, you will ultimately move faster, and choosing how you filter complexity is a better strategy than simplifying to amplify.
Douglas, thank you so much for doing this. Incredibly grateful. Took a long time coming, but absolutely buzzing, excited to talk to you today, mate. What I'd love to start with is listen to a podcast with Matthew McConaughey, who's the obviously illustrious Hollywood actor. And he said something that really struck a chord, and I think I'd love to explore it with you. And he says, there's a difference between a good man and a nice guy. And by that, he means it's about making decisions under pressure where you can potentially upset people, upset your team. And I think in the context of business, in the context of building brands, if you try and be a nice guy, it may not be the best thing. 1, for the business, 2, for you, 3, actually for the team members you're trying to make, create change. But then a good man is willing to not be necessarily liked. A good man is willing to make the hard decision, even if it upsets people. And the good man sees the bigger vision of where they're trying to go. I'd love to know what has been some of the hardest decisions you've had to make, maybe at Tony's, maybe at Innocent, where you've had to realise like you've been titillating between the edges of being a good man and a nice guy.
Wow, good place to start.
Yeah.
Look, I think whenever you're a mission-led business or a impact-led business, as the CEO or as one of the senior leaders, you're constantly in the state of balancing things that on the face of it don't quite fit together, but you can always find a way. And I guess at a macro level, I always look at it and go, how do we communicate why we're making certain decisions? And going back to the mission is just a really important part of that. Because constantly, if you're trying to, in shorthand, balance people, profit and planet, we are, at Tony's, and it was the same at Innocent, you're sort of constantly making people unhappy of like, well, the product costs a little more and therefore you have to go and sell it to the retailer at a higher price because of the mission. And on the mission side, you're like, but we could do more for, we could invest more in the farmers, we could invest more, we could go even further. You're like, we could, but then we don't have a viable business model. And so I kind of constantly find myself in a state where if I'm keeping everybody inside the business equally unhappy, it means we're probably getting the balance of decision making about right, because everybody coming from one particular lens thinks, but we should be doing more here, or we should be finding a different way to do this. And it's that sort of constant editing to make sure that the whole is right, to make sure that you're making impact, you're delivering through your supply chain, in our case at Tony's, for the farmers, for a change model in West Africa. At the same time, we're not a chocolate distribution charity. We have to demonstrate that this is a viable business model, because our mission is not just to do it for ourselves, but to change the whole industry. Yes. And if we don't do that, if we don't make it an economic model, a capitalist model, the big guys will look at us and go, that's really nice, but our shareholders would never sign up for that because you're not it doesn't make a profit. It's nice, it's the right thing to do, but it's not the smart thing to do. And we have to constantly put those two things in balance, because if we don't deliver.
The bit you said, absolute banging piece of wisdom, was when people are equally unhappy in the business, you're probably doing the right thing. And that is the framing of like good guy versus nice guy. The nice guy would want to keep everyone sweet, and then everything the whole thing just essentially implodes if you're going around people pleasing to everyone. But then I think being the good guy is like, actually, if the team are equally unhappy, we're moving in the right direction.
Yeah, and that the challenge there is then about communication,
Yeah.
because in the heat of the week and the month and the hitting the numbers for this year or whatever it may be, people are under pressure. They've got their heads down.
Yeah.
What I think about a lot is how we constantly lift people's eyes up to say the reason it's like this, the reason it's hard at the moment is because, and talk about the progress we're making at a macro level. So that's where, for me, purpose, vision, and values, mission, vision, and values are so important, because it allows you, weekly and the team meetings going on here right now, lifting people back up to what's the big picture, and then working back through the details, saying, and this is why today feels hard or why today feels good. It's just so important. Because then people can kind of refill their that's why I'm here. I remember now, because it's, for all of us, right? The pressure's on. This is FMCG is a tough old game. And so when you're right in it, you sometimes forget that. And I think as a leader in a business like this, you're just, you've got to push people on the day to day. You've got to ask tough things of people, but you've also got to bring it back to why we're here.
That's a beautiful barbell strategy of like keeping people lifting their eyes up to the bigger mission, but also like saying like, look, be the good man versus the nice guy. Let's go delve deep into the specifics of like how to write there'll be a lot of people listening to this writing, maybe not on the same scale as Tony's, but we'll get into that later, but like even if it's a small team, it's the same principles.
Everybody started at zero.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. So how would you go and write a speech, or like to communicate a meeting or a big decision? Like, what is your process of writing that and making sure your clarity of thought is clear, concise, pushes people hard, but lifts them up at the same time?
Yeah, so literally 2 days ago was the start of our new book year.
Oh, perfect timing then, yeah.
And on the first day of our financial year, I stand up and do a kind of happy new book year, as it's known inside the business speech.
Yeah.
And here at Tony's and similarly at Innocent, I always start with exactly the same page, and it's our mission, vision, and values all on one page. And I make sure I spend 10 minutes talking about that before we get into, well, let's look back at last year, or let's look at this year. The first thing I think a CEO should always do is start with, remember the big picture, start with that big picture. So that's where you are. We then talked about, what was a challenging but ultimately successful year for us last year. Where were the pitfalls? Where were the things? And also, in a cocoa world that's a little upside down right now, we've just been through a really tough budgeting process where, again, I've had to be pretty tough with the teams and not, people, as ever, when it comes to budget season, but we can do so much more with X, Y, and Z. I've had to say no a lot. But also, what's really important is then saying, but we've been through a tough process to get to a budget that you really believe is deliverable. So I can stand there with confidence at the first beginning of the year saying, it's been a tough couple of months, but we've now got a platform which we can deliver on our promises. And for me, one of the things that I take very seriously is if I make a commitment to shareholders or whatever, I want to do it in a way that I know I can deliver on those promises. Not in a safe way. There's always stretch in a plan.
Yeah.
But I think for teams, setting high standards, being a high performing team, it's about making tough choices to make sure you can deliver.
Fuck boring workshops. Introducing Hungary's 10x Challenger Brand Workshops. 10x creativity beats 10x budgets. Bring the poddy from your headphones to real-life rich learning. They're absolutely banging. I've chinwagged with some of the best Challenger brands in the world. Innocent, Vita Coco, Tony's Chocolonely, Bold Bean, Brewdog, and Bear More. And some of the greatest marketing minds in the world. Seth Godin, Rory Sutherland, Sir John Hegarty, the absolute Donnies. My boy James Hicks and I have created 3 absolutely banging workshops. The best storyteller wins a banging copywriting workshop. 10x and unleash your creative inner being. New business Donnies using creativity to absolutely sell and close new business. We've run these for Naked Wines, Vita Coco, and Corson Press. They all absolutely loved it. Each workshop is littered with a luscious mix of hand-picked, delectable and delicious goods, pastries, croissants, and loads more. You'll feel like a pampered guest at Hungry Hotel of Creativity. If you're interested and you're interested for your team, please DM me on LinkedIn or Instagram. What have been some of the hardest choices you've had to make over the last year or so?
I think we've had a big, if you like, cost tsunami come at us with cocoa prices going up 3x, tariffs, currency movements, which now in our world, as we grow in the US and here in the UK, if you're reporting in euros and the euro strengthening, all those things have a big impact. So not, we're growing the business very fast, 20% a year on year at our scale,
wild.
over 200 million now. We grew the business over 40 million last year. And yeah, I'd love to grow the marketing line more. I'd love to grow the people line more. And in a normal state, we would be, but we've had to say, no, we can't. We have to keep everything really tight, really buttoned down, because we don't have certainty about where cocoa prices are going or where tariffs are going. So you're asking a lot of the team and being really tight on resources at a time where it feels like the top line's moving fast. So surely there's more money around, but in our case, there just isn't. And so you have to kind of, again, communicate why is that the case, communicate why we think we've prioritized enough so that the team can deliver against the plan.
And then in terms of delivering bad news and almost that other side and pushing people, what's the art of doing that in the right way? Because again, it's like, as you say, high performance team, if you're kind of a high performer, I think you're kind of both incredibly driven, but also quite sensitive. So it's a very interesting balance.
And without, I mean, I know you've had Adam on the podcast before. Transparent. I mean, what I learned from Innocent was transparency is the king here, right? Just being honest.
Yeah.
Not treating people like children. Everyone's grown ups. They've been through a lot of life, even if they're just out of university. They can, if you're clear and logical and calm about whatever the situation is, I think people respect you for that. And so transparency, I think, is your friend in a way that more people think, I've got to protect the team from bad news, or I've got to protect, keep it a secret because it's like not a good thing.
Interesting.
I'm just in completely the opposite place. I think that openly talk about the tough times, and again, sort of look to the future. And I mean, I think through COVID, the phrase, the Stockdale principle, was used about 10 million times. So I don't want to overdo it, but that, honesty about the short term with clarity of why you have optimism about the long term, I think is just a really, really important balance to get right.
I love that. So already we've sort of discussed about like the balance of keeping people ever so slightly unhappy or unequally unhappy moves business forward, the short term reality versus the long term sort of positivity and optimism. Because I think you're right, like a lot of people try and protect what's going on. That in typical out of business school books, it's like, protect the team, always be positive, happy, clappy, blah, blah, blah. But that's bollocks, because in reality, people, as you say, people are grown-ups, like they can see through it.
They also know.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, if you're kidding yourselves, they don't know. I mean, again, in today's world of everyone's got the app of what last week's sales, or a little rumour that this is going on. So people know. I mean, the world is a lot more sort of transparent and fast-moving in terms of information. So you're kidding yourselves if you think you're really holding on into that information for yourself. But what is happening is then people taking little bits of information and getting the wrong end of the stick.
Yes.
So actually, by being transparent and saying, it's not great, but we're going to be fine, or the reason it's going to be okay in the medium term is this, rather than it getting out of hand and going, well, they're all locked in a room and therefore this must be the end of the company, or whatever the context may be. So transparency also allows you to own the message out in terms of what you actually want to convey. If you sit silently, either because you're kind of afraid of telling people bad news, or you don't think you're trying to protect them, they'll make up much worse stuff in their head as to what the story is than what actually the story is. People will go to the worst outcome generally. So if the outcome's bad, it probably isn't as bad as what most people are telling themselves.
Well, and also like people in companies, I've seen it firsthand, is like people talk, and you want to own that upstream before it like becomes cancerous, where it's sort of the cancerous Chinese whispers where it's spreading through the organisation like wildfire. What are some other contrarian views you've got, or maybe common sense contrarian views from a CEO's perspective that you've learned?
Let me think. I think it comes down to, I don't know whether they're contrarian, but and again, without sort of repeating what some of your other guests have said, I have a very strong view in terms of the roles of, what I would call branding, classic marketing, innovation, and sort of country growth, how you grow a business like Innocent or how you grow a business like Tony's, how you find the right balance between investing in each of those three things.
Yeah, let's go into it because this is perfect. So what were they again? They were the
so from a kind of sort of brand marketing point of view, what I would call a rolling innovation plan. And then sort of geographic expansion. If you look at those three things in balance, I think in the past people said, well, you've got your core range and therefore you should then just put loads and loads of marketing money behind those things and grow it, and then occasionally do innovation and as a sort of last resort kind of expand geographies. And I've always just looked at it quite differently in terms of I'm a man that likes irons in the fire and options, because not everything works. So you don't want to bet the house on anything. And therefore, from my point of view, innovation, particularly in a business like Innocent and Tony's, where you can do innovation relatively cheaply, you can roll out quite a few products. And as long as you're disciplined about then backing the ones that work and quickly dropping the ones that don't, I think is just a really powerful way to grow the business. What you see from the big guys is they will get a launch. They will probably take too long to getting it to market because they'll have done 58 pieces of research. There's a lot of fear inside big companies about failure. And so they over-research it. Then they're a little behind on their timing and somebody else has got the latest trend out in the market. So then they say, well, this must work. So then they pile in loads and loads of marketing money at day of launch. And get 1 in 10 works, and that's the stories you hear, but 9 out of 10 don't. And then there's a sort of inquisition into the business. Why did this fail? It's like the conclusion is normally then, well, we better research the next one a bit harder. And guess what? It takes even longer. So you create fear. What I tried to do at Innocent and picking up from where the founders left off, and what we do at Tony is how do you remove the fear from failure? And if you remove the fear from failure and you try what I would call small to medium-sized bets, it's really easy then to turn the marketing taps on to things that work. And I have a great belief that if the thing is not selling on shelf without marketing ain't going to save it one way or the other.
Wow.
So I'm a much bigger believer in putting something on shelf, seeing its first 3 or 4 months rate of sale. If it's above the threshold, that's when you pile in with the marketing money. That's when you really back the thing, because you've already halved your risk by saying, well, this thing's already selling. I'm now trying to get it from the second quartile maybe into the first quartile. I haven't bet the house or my marketing pot on a thing that was always going to be in the fourth quartile, and maybe if I'm lucky, I'll get it to the third quartile. So we always had a program of rolling innovation, and then you back the winners, rather than you kind of bring it all together on day one and you make these kind of big, this year's all about the marketing money going behind this one thing. For me, that never made any sense.
I love the way you see it from this almost, I think, again, I've been, you can see things from 10,000 feet, especially when you lay it out like that, which is like the marketing brand, rolling innovation markets.
Yeah.
Right. And I think just being able to move and almost seeing it as a moving organism and not like a static thing of like, right, this year we're betting the fucking house on this product. What's like, as you say, the one way to figure out if it's going to work or not is if it's on shelf for 3 months and it ain't moving, marketing's not going to shift that.
Exactly.
Are there any specific examples, Innocent or Tony's, of that rolling innovation? Brand and marketing pillar here, rolling innovation pillar 2, geographic expansion pillar 3. Of that working with you guys?
Yeah, with any we didn't on the countryside, what you have to understand, I've never seen a market get to any meaningful scale, certainly within 3 years, and typically within 5 years. So when I'm thinking about, and we, Innocent, as you know, went from nothing to over 500 million, and Tony's, in the last couple of years, we've grown the business over 100 million. And you can't just rely on one thing, but you also have to understand with the countries, I'm now making bets on sort of markets. We've gone into Australia, we're rolling into Canada. I kind of go, I've launched them, but they're not my big thing. What I'm hoping is that they're going to be my big thing in year 3 to 5. So that's going to deliver meaningful growth for me at scale, not when it's at 1 to 2 million, it's when it's suddenly going from 5 to 15 million. Suddenly that's 10 million of growth in a year because you've done the groundwork, because you've built the retailer relationships. Country growth is just on this much longer lead time. So you have to think about, okay, what do I want? Where do I want scale coming in year 2, 3, or 4? And some of those markets won't work as well. So you're laying down a sort of set of bets on a certain timetable on countries. On innovation, certainly in the chilled juice world, where you could get stuff to market quicker, it's a bit slower in a 12-month chocolate world. Again, you're laying bets, but they're much sort of shorter term in terms of the binary, does it work, does it not work?
Yeah, sure.
The reaction, obviously, from does it sell on shelf, does it not, happens really quite quickly. But I'm also, again, there's a big difference between launching another flavour of your existing product or launching, a completely new range, whether it's a kind of seasonal range or whether it's sort of, in our case, sort of tinies, which are the small chunks wrapped as a sort of gifting product.
Yep.
Those are very different types of bets. And again, so I'm always just thinking about the layers of bets I've got going, knowing that I also can afford one or two of them not to work and still deliver good growth.
Layers of bets.
So this sort of idea of this year's about one thing, and everyone says you should focus. I'm like, if you want to grow a business from 100 to 500 million, you've got to be smart and you've got to be tactical. But focusing on one thing won't get you at pace from 100 to 500 million. So I guess the contrarian view, long way back round to the original question, is probably I don't believe in the one big thing kind of strategy. I believe in, and I've scaled Innocent and we're scaling Tony's with a kind of multiple bets on different timescales, knowing that some of them will fail, ultimately adds up to proper growth.
Multiple bets, multiple timescales. That I've never heard anyone describe it like this. This is genius. Okay, so what are some of the bets you're placing? Either we can go going forward, or maybe we can do like the last 3-4 years. I mean, let's do that actually, because then we can actually work out what's worked, what hasn't worked.
Yeah. So
what were some bets you placed maybe 2 years ago or a year ago where you're like, right, these are my bankers, and just go through that again, that 3 things: brand marketing, rolling innovation, country.
I guess let's sort of pick up from where Adam left off, the kind of Innocent phase where I took over. The business is already at 200 million, so you're like, this is a pretty good.
Yeah.
Where do I go from here?
Yeah.
These guys have done a pretty damn good job, and obviously I've been part of that. But their name above the door. What we had there was we had some countries seeded. And we had principally, we got going in juice. So we'd had the smoothies, we'd made the transition to juice. What I then did was say, okay, we need another layer to smoothies. So we had the core smoothies, but they'd kind of hit the nothing but fruit thing, had done brilliantly for the business. And there was this sort of mantra inside the company, like, yeah, but that's the magic. I was like, no, the quality of the product is the magic. So when we said, well, let's do super smoothies with added vitamins, they're like, but we're nothing but fruit. And you're like, no, that was explaining that range, not explaining the company. And so we made a bet on super smoothies, which was basically, inside the angst inside the business was huge. It was like, but. And so we had to lay a bet to say, no, we're going to do smoothies with added vitamins, with a kind of positioning about, energy or gut health or whatever it may be. So we laid that bet. We then, obviously, the juice bet, moving into carafes with juices, not just smoothies, was working. So again, how do you expand that from core apple juice and orange juice into multiple flavors alongside that? And then what we were doing was we were saying, right, Germany, France, Scandinavia, how do we properly invest with not just demonstrating for the sale process that they worked? You actually then had to make them work.
Yeah.
How do you invest behind those things? And particularly with France, we made a very meaningful bet in a field sales force team to say the only way to scale in France is you basically got to hire 20 people way ahead of your revenue curve to get visibility and distribution on shelf. So there's your map of 3 different things going on at the same time. Where do I then put my marketing money? Well, it turned out that juice was the absolute flyer at this point, so it was really driving revenue. So that's why.
So was this the superfood juice?
No. So this was just at this time. This was apple and orange and kind of mango, tropical juice. So we came to super juices later.
Right. Okay. Then you got the tap of marketing and brands that you.
So we put it behind the thing that was really driving at the time. Now with super smoothies, we launched them. They did okay, but what we then did was did lots of editing. So we had sort of dark labels and we had 4 different positionings. What we could see was that the energy one, effectively natural energy, was the one that was selling. So very quickly, within a year, we positioned them all, different flavors around natural energy. At that moment, they really started to work. So we did about 3 different iterations over about 18 months, and you suddenly saw the rate of sale go. And again, that's the point we put the marketing money behind the super smoothies. And guess what? Then juices were starting to tap out a little because their distribution. So it was okay, from super smoothies to super juices. So you're just kind of layering one on top of the other, and all of the while the kind of country growth was happening.
Yeah.
And again, once France got to a certain scale, I could then say, right, I'm actually going to properly put some marketing money, because I'm not just a Carrefour central, Monoprix Central Paris brand. I'm now a national brand. I can see that my rate of sale is starting to grow. Let's do some national advertising in France. And again, that then really moved the dial. But we were 7 years into France and we'd lost a lot of money before we put meaningful advertising money, marketing money down.
'Cause that's what Adam was saying to me on the podcast, and Giles had talked about it. Is that almost? I think Adam just detailed it. Was getting slammed in the board meetings, basically saying like, "What is France going to work?" And he was kind of just like had a lot of gumption and almost prudence to be like, "This is going to work." But from your perspective, Douglas, like this idea of like multiple layering of bets at different timescales is super interesting. How did you guys get France moving specifically? Like, what actually happened?
So, again, we had this original strategy of Brits abroad. So it had worked so well in the UK. I was like, well, take some British people who love innocent and put them in France.
Them in Paris.
What could possibly go wrong? I mean, everything went wrong. And again, I've referenced before, but consumers are much more the same across Europe than everyone will tell you.
What do you mean by that? So,
well, I've spent years both in chocolate and previously in juice where everyone says, oh, but my consumers in Scandinavia like this kind of thing, and my consumers in France, like, what you've got in Britain will never work. We're like, well, we can't afford to have bespoke flavors and bespoke levels of strawberry and guess what? If you get your positioning right, everything sells pretty well in most European markets. So from a product point of view, you can scale a European brand, and to some extent, like we are doing now in the US, a US brand with the same portfolio. So if everyone tells you it's in the product, the difference is, I challenge that. I think it's in your positioning in market by market. In France, it's like Germany, like Scandinavia, the commercial execution is so different. You need people that understand how to sell and build retailer relationships and understand where the margin goes in the P&L, because where you give margin is completely different in France to where you give it to Tesco. So you need that expertise. So what the second phase, which worked, was hire people that understand the trade strategy and make them fall in love with innocent, rather than send people who are in love with innocent and go and make that work. So that was the sort of strategy that we took.
Yep.
And then with the brand, and one of the things I'm proudest of my time at Innocent is that the French think it's a French brand.
What? I didn't. What?
Because
tell me more.
Well, because again, we said.
How did you do that?
Well, because I think we hired some. Eventually, we hired some good commercial people, and we hired someone that could tell jokes in French. So our packaging was where you told the stories, right? So you then started in a very small way doing the French social media and the French packaging with people that understood French humour. So you're not copying and pasting English jokes and putting them on French packaging. And then we did the first big push we did was a kind of a sort of homage to Paris and how we loved Paris and all the rest of it. So it's unusual for an international brand to sort of then do that. So over time, what the feedback was, it got to scale, and they thought it was a French brand, kind of a young entrepreneurial French brand coming through. They hadn't sort of really, obviously some people knew, but in general, it was loved like it was a local brand. And I think that's powerful because you gave local marketeers the opportunity to kind of mold the macro positioning, the macro sense of fun to that local market. And that was really powerful. And now when I look at the US, you kind of roll forward 10 years, and I'm now sitting at Tony's, and we're doing the same thing. Again, what you need, we've got the same product set in the US. And everyone says, but the Americans love this, and it'll never work. The US is now the biggest part of our business. So it's now, we sell more in the US now than we do in the Netherlands, which is a sort of mind-blowing transition for the business, with the same product set. But again, the marketeers have the freedom to sort of say, well, you'd probably need to find a different balance between ethics and taste in the way that you communicate to US consumers than you did when you launched it in Amsterdam, where it was very much about the ethics 15 years ago.
So I was speaking to Nicola about this before we jumped on, mate. But the podcast that went out today was with Seth Godin, obviously a big marketing genius, and he detailed your story.
Right.
One of the questions was how do you go from smallest viable audience, that sort of bell curve, adoption curve, where you go from early adopters and you've got across the chasm to sort of the rest of the market. And he's like, the story with Tony's right when it started to get those diehard fans was the piece about all the ethics, and of course we're going to get on to all of this, changing the chocolate supply chain, the purpose. As you get bigger, you need, and he says where most brands go wrong is, one, just because you're successful when you're early doesn't mean you're going to be successful as you get bigger. And two, he says the best brands create a shareable status story for their consumer. So it's the shareable status story of Tony's, and I'm just bouncing ideas around here, could be like when it started, you rock up to a dinner party, it's like, this chocolate they're saving the supply chain, right? That's what Seth said. But as you get to be a bigger brand 10, 15 years later, the story is, as you go mass market, is these American parents rocking up to a Halloween party, and the shareable status story of the brand is less about the ethics of the brand and more about, oh my God, look how thick the chocolate is. Look at the taste. Look at the crazy packaging. And I think the way he detailed it in 2 minutes was insane. But it's interesting what you're saying about America and how that market's beginning to take shape with the marketeers. Based on that and the way the shareable story changes, how do you think about that as you move Tony's into America?
So I think the things that both Innocent and Tony's have in common, a really clear mission, purpose, a real passion for that, but they both had fun in their fun and a great goddamn product. So because if you're a mission-led business, what you've got to avoid is, even if it resonates with a sort of small group at the beginning, is that it comes across a bit of hair shirt. We're doing this because it's punishment, but it's good for the world, but it feels like a punishment. Both Innocent and Tony's have a huge amount of fun in them, as well as a very, very serious kind of mission. And ending exploitation in cocoa, talking very openly and actively about child labour, and yet people love us as a brand. We're very talkable. Finding that balance and doing it in a way that is humorous, and the product has to work. And this, you've had lots of people on this podcast come back to you many times. You can be as worthy as you like. If your product isn't just not goddamn delicious, you don't get anywhere.
Yeah.
And so this combination of clear mission, great product, and a business model that works, if those three things are how you drive meaningful change. And Innocent had it, Tony's has got it, but every day is a sort of constant battle between those three things to make sure that you keep the standards up on all three. So
what you're saying there is almost way further upstream of what Seth's saying. It's get those three right, and then the shareable status story, or how people share the brand can change, but those three things have to be in place first.
Yeah, because from my point of view, I honestly, and it will be different by, it's not even market, by individual person, because we kind of talk about America, but there's millions and millions of individual people. If somebody just loves it because they like the color, they like my design on the packaging, brilliant. I don't care if they actually don't realize about the ethics. I'm very clear that I have to get the ethics right to drive, the mission on the ground in West Africa to increase the number of beans, to get more farmers, with a living income paid, do traceability on child labor. That's what I really care about. I know that I need to sell a lot of chocolate to do that, and I know I need to make it a profitable business model, because if I don't, one, I won't be able to keep funding that change, and two, I won't convince anyone else to come with me. So, but if a consumer who comes in through the consumer door just goes, this is goddamn delicious, I'm going to buy a lot of this chocolate, fine. Now, loyalty and repeat purchase and lots of other people do come through the ethics door, and they say, I buy this chocolate because of the ethics, because of the way it is. That's also fantastic. I'm not knocking any door that anyone comes into the brand at, but ultimately I need to have lots of doors that people come in through. If they're only coming in through an ethical, if they're only coming in through an ethical door,
yes.
there's only so many people that will walk through that door and pay that price. If someone else has got we're one of the most expensive bars on shelf. If someone else has got, I'm prepared to that pay because it's delicious, and someone else says, I'm prepared to pay that price because it's ethical and delicious, and that they're the people that then do your free marketing for you. Because
lots of different doors. That's such a beautiful way of putting it. How do you create more doors? Like as you get bigger?
So not. I think in our case that again, the mission is a really interesting door and allows you to enter, particularly also with retail. Getting on shelf. The mission, both for Innocent and for Tony's, has helped us get on a lot of shelves, probably earlier and slightly bigger than we would have done anyway. So again, it gives you visibility. Mm-hmm. Taste, product. In the end, millions of businesses before kind of ethical missions came along survived or thrived because of the product basis. And then that fun, it's just so permissible, because if someone wants, and fun means so many different things to different people, but again, it allows cultural reference. If you're a mission-led brand, and going back to my point about France, I think people want to feel connected to you in a different way than just a kind of what I would call if you're a washing powder brand or that's just a sort of global. Whereas with Innocent and with Tony's, and why the local marketing and the local social media and the local jokes were so important, is because people want to, if you're kind of mission ethical there, they want to feel like it's part of them. They want to feel like it's locally connected. So I think allowing your marketeers in local markets to kind of create local connection, to create a sense of place about the brand being locally, I think is a sort of powerful enhancer, rather than if you're this, we're ethical, but then we look exactly like we're the dubbed Nissan car advert in 400 markets around the world. Yeah. I don't think your sense of reason for being then goes into people's hearts in the same way. Whereas if you're like showing up in their community, doing jokes about Super Bowl in the US versus doing jokes about, the Tour de France in France or whatever it may be, it makes them feel a bit more connected to you. And getting that balance right is also really hard as well.
Because that seems really good. And I interviewed Mark Palmer, was the marketing director at he owns Corson Press. He was marketing director at Pret a Manger, really did Green and Blacks as well. Yeah, but he was saying when they were in Pret, the tone of voice was completely obviously in Britain, it's kind of polite, whereas the Americans we got the best coffee. They want you to be rambunctious and shout about it, and what the messaging just didn't land in that market. So they had to kind of weirdly go anti what they were originally to make it work there. When you said it's really hard, just sink into that a bit more. What are some of the textures and nuances and complexities of that balance?
I think the complexity, because again, the marketing books will tell you if you want to be a global brand, you've got to create the global playbook, and you've got to have this locked look and feel that's then posted to the markets, and you've got to hold them accountable that everything has to look exactly the same wherever you are in the world, and that's how we get efficiency and effectiveness and kind of a global. It's consumers don't think like oh, I want this brand because it's global. They want to feel something about a brand. And I think Innocent and at Tony's, we sign up for the messiness that comes from the internal kind of tension between you want to do what with my packaging or you want to say what on social media versus the rules say you're not allowed to do that. So I think giving local markets a little bit of freedom to bring local texture to a brand, whilst it creates messiness and it's not neat and tidy and it's not a global playbook, is the way that I think you create richness in brands. And ultimately brands are, is a promise to a consumer, and it's a promise about a mission, but it's also a promise about who we are, what we stand for. And unless you're doing that with local context and local nuance, it's really hard to sort of shortcut people to love you, because these global statements aren't really how we think as humans. They're not really how we behave as humans.
Another contrarian point, mate, in that like, what I love there is, you sort of sign up for messiness.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful way of putting it.
Particularly when you're a challenger brand, right?
Sure.
And even though Innocent became a big brand and Tony's is a big brand, I have tiny marketing budget. So yeah, you can kind of maybe get to neat and tidy when you're spending 200 million a year to kind of, to some extent, brainwash everybody with TV adverts and whatever. In our case, we're scrappy. I mean, we spend 6 million a year on marketing at Tony's. 6 million. I've got a 240 million business. That's a very small amount of marketing money. So these guys have to be making that money work incredibly hard. And if I'm telling them, well, you need to do this from the center, they're like, that's a terrible way to spend the money in the US. So you have to give them some freedom to...
What freedom have you given them in the US?
Well, so...
What are they doing as well, I suppose?
So again, how you get the balance between spending the money in store, spending the money on socials, spending the money on effectively brand partnerships and activations. The sort of brand partnerships and activations that they may choose in the US might have a slightly different slant to the ones in the Netherlands. The way that they allocate their money in the US for what I would call shopper marketing is different, because actually in the US there are some things like Instacart where you get much better data, much clarity on how to spend your money wisely, whereas in Europe it's like, which retailer do I want to butter up by paying for their in-store media, none of which is how effective is any of it. So if you're saying we need to spend 30% on this and 30% on that, and that's the global rule, I just think you miss out on
the nuance
and the expertise. And then if we've looked at how it's played out in the US, they very much focused on what I would call earned media through kind of big TV pieces. So whether it was on CBS, whether the John Oliver show was a kind of tipping moment for us.
Sorry, when you say earned media, I ask some dumb questions, like as in TV, essentially.
No, earned as in PR.
Right.
So effectively stuff you're not paying for, but you get good brand visibility. So
how did you do that then? Yeah.
So again, a producer on one of the shows had seen a slot about Tony's and his ethical supply chain, and then spent a year working with them to effectively do a slot on the chocolate industry. And I don't know if you know John Oliver, but he does he does satirical kind of investigative journalism to some extent, where there's a lot of humor in it, but there's a lot of kind of truth, which is perfect for us. Yeah. He did a show on the chocolate industry, kind of lifting the lid on some of the inequality and all the things that are going on, and then said, but there's this Dutch chocolate brand, Tony's, that's doing it the right way now here in the US. That was a lot of work focused in a kind of segment that we hadn't focused on in the UK or in the Netherlands, but the US team were like, this is the way to kind of jump visibility. Yeah. From a consumer point of view, a lot of people see it, but actually more importantly, buyers watch it. And all of a sudden the phone was ringing from Walmart, the phone was ringing from Costco, going, oh, well, what about a conversation? And we, they were so kind of big, we were like, well, we're pacing this. So we hadn't even approached Walmart, and yet then they suddenly start approaching us. So weirdly, sometimes what you think is consumer PR is also PR for retail buyers. And I think that's an underestimated thought in particularly when you're going to new markets. You think you're the big I am in your local market, but a retail buyer of Walmart has absolutely no idea what you are, who you are. So how do you appeal to them as humans as well.
Yeah.
And then you've got data and stories and a great product to back it up. You need all of that. But
Founders, cash is literally king. If you don't have cash in your business, you are going bust, mate. Imagine you've landed a banging retailer or you've got a brand new bit of MPD going live. Suppliers need paying today, but the cash won't hit your bank account for 3 months. It's a headache wrapped in a nightmare, and that's why I'm delighted to announce we are partnering with Mimo, short for money in, money out. Mimo automates your finances, streamlines workflows, and keeps your books up to date. But the real hero here, the absolute Don, is Mimo Flex, flexible working capital built into your finance workflow. With Mimo Flex, you can draw what you need when you need it and repay as receivables land. Use it to keep inventory moving, fund campaigns, or negotiate better supplier terms. You could apply for a revolving line of up to 1 million, and you only pay month to month on what you've actually used. It's insane. Credit subject to eligibility and status, fees and terms do apply. Listen, your favourite challenger brands literally love Mimo. Surreal, Hunter and Gatherer, Nice Wine, Better Nature Tempeh, and tons more. Learn more and apply at mimohq.com. I like that idea of the consumer marketing is trade marketing as much as anything. Like that's why I like maybe it's slightly changed, but I used to love Taste of London back in the day.
yeah,
It's a consumer-facing show, but they have that. Then they started doing that day on the Friday, which was more like sort of trade. But all the buyers want a day off. They don't even do the Christmas one before, but the best one was when they used to do it with the buyers because they want the Friday off. It's going into Christmas. Yes, you're seeing all the consumers and they're getting pissed up in the afternoon, but all the buyers are there, and it's just like that nuance between consumer and trade is delicious.
Yeah, and Expo West and Sweet Snacks in the US are exactly the same, right? Your real work is done between about 10 and 11:30 because all the buyers are walking the floor before any of this kind of what I would call consumers looking for freebies arrive. That those first 2 hours each morning of a trade show is where the real conversations, the real stuff happens.
On the other side of this, one of my favourite things is by a guy called Paul Graham, which is called Do Things That Don't Scale.
Yeah.
And so it's these small one-to-one interactions that build. I really believe there's a difference between like meat fans and die-hard fans, and ultimately we want as much as we want these big things, we also want die-hard fans. And I think again, I was speaking to Nicola, like you've got that one shop, and I discovered you guys in 2019 when I was flying to Japan. And I was going for the World Cup with my old man, and I was like, what the fuck is this? It was like it was like Willy Wonka, like in actualization, but it was one store in the airport.
Yep.
And I ended up stuffing my face on the plane with a load of Tonys. It was wonderful. But then also Nicola was saying there's one store in South Bank, which has got like just a whole wall of Tonys. And she was saying to me that, and sorry for context, Nicola's the marketing director, those two stores, the amount of people that she's heard have just said, oh my God, I discovered it there. Like, how do you guys think about things that don't necessarily scale but build that deep connection with people?
Yeah, I think whenever you're doing anything experiential, your kind of immediate payback
is depth.
There's no Excel spreadsheet that will tell you that that's a good thing to do, and yet it is. I mean, to this day, obviously going back to the innocent days, the festivals, which were kind of almost pre-festival time and giving away free tickets. I've probably met, 50 million people that told me that they were there at those festivals. Even to this day, people still talk about those things. That was so we used to do fruit stock. So we did fruit stock back in the early 2003, 4, 5. It was this basically take over Regent's Park, chuck on a free festival, and we thought 10,000, 20,000 people. Like we had 100,000 people over 2 days. And so it was just this sort of, and we ran that for 3 or 4 years until the park kind of shut it down and made us ticket it. And once you ticketed it, it wasn't the same. I mean, that from an economics point of view, that made no sense at all. It was all free. You were basically putting bands on and hot dog stores and a Pim's tent and a few smoothies in the corner, but most people were drinking beer. So it was kind of like, is this, but yeah, it had the vibe. It had exactly what we wanted to say about the brand. It connected your brand to that experience, and it was just one of the most brilliant sort of early things that you could do, even though the economics sort of didn't add up on it. As you say, similarly, actually, I would say the store in Amsterdam, whilst it's in the airport and you pay a lot for retail space, again, the visibility we get from that one store, Schiphol's one of the busiest airports in the world. I'm a big believer in finding the things that on the face of them don't make sense. Again, the big net at Innocent it shouldn't work, and yet it works with the little hats on the hats on the bottles. Yeah. It shouldn't work. It's a stupid idea on the face of it, and yet it was a little acorn that's turned into this massive oak tree of a marketing idea. So letting these things breathe.
How do you find those things? Is there a way to do that?
Again, I'm a great believer, and we talked about it a bit earlier, about kind of removing the fear from the conversation, where you say, let ideas breathe. Those ideas are never going to be top down, right? There's going to be someone who is going to. How does the sort of bottom up ideas come through? Yep. Also, again, back to my irons in the fire. You're not. No one was ever betting the house on the big net, or no one was ever betting the house on the Schiphol. But you lay 10 bets, and then you've got to be good at diagnosing what's working and what's not working.
Let's go into that then. Because I always believe, like, one of my principles of life is you need a lot of lead to find gold. So it's actually, the creativity is about giving yourself the permission, removal of fear, the removal to do lazy work. So the permission to do sort of lazy work, i.e. crap ideas, because if you do 22, maybe
and you've got to be where you've got to be smart is the ability to diagnose.
How do you do that?
What's working, what's not working, and then be ready with the money to pile behind the one or two things that are working, and because if you do 10 things and you don't have the second wave of investment, then it's like,
what's the point?
Well, even the good idea didn't go anywhere because it didn't have enough money behind it. So it's laying just enough bets to reduce your. The way I see it is, I'm laying, let's say in a year, I'm laying 5 bets. I know 2 will fail, whether that's a product thing or whether that's a marketing campaign. And I know something random will also happen outside of my strategy. So have I got enough money in the budget to then go, oh, well, this thing on social media is blowing up. Yeah, I've got $100,000 to back it with some social media funding to kind of then amplify it. Or, the campaign that we've actually done, or the product we've just launched, is actually working really, really well. Give the shopper marketing teams another $250,000 to really double down on it, so that we know that our distribution stocking points will not just sort of double next year, they'll triple, because we've proven the rate of sale and we've taken it from top of second quartile into the first quartile. So you've got to make sure you've got in the bank. You're not taking so many bets you've got nothing left in the bank in a year. You've got to take 3 or 4 bets, and then...
What are some of the bets you took that maybe didn't work, or...
100. We launched...
Some of your favourite ones? Tony's, for instance.
Yeah, so with Tony's, with probably 1 in every 2 flavour we launches doesn't really go anywhere, and so you've got to kind of quickly pull it off the shelf. Innocent, in a weird way, it was easier. Although short shelf life, everyone goes, oh, that must be hard. You could innovate quicker, because you only had to sit around for 30 days before you realise you had the shelf life. Whereas in Tony's, when I'm developing products, I've got to wait 12 months to see if I can even start selling it into the retailer, because I've got to do the shelf life testing on it. So weirdly, short shelf life, I could get things to market quicker because I had less lead time.
Yep.
And then if it was failing, it had to come out quickly, because it was you had so much waste in your warehouse that you economically couldn't afford it. The danger of what I would call long shelf life innovation is like, well, it delivered 500,000 of sales or 1 million of sales, and I don't want to lose that for next year's kind of merry-go-round. Maybe I won't delist it because I've got long shelf life. Whereas actually, you've got to be ruthless about getting rid of stuff that doesn't work in order to create the space for new stuff to come through, and not just hang on to retail sales. So we had a chocolate milk product at Tony's. It was a nice food service business that did £1 million a year. I was like, we have to get rid of this because somebody in technical's getting distracted about what, we're making visits to the co-packer. We're doing that resource could be way better spent elsewhere. Back to the innocent examples with when I took over what is now Bowl, but at the time was the innocent veg pots. That was a 8 to 10 million business, and I closed it.
Yeah, Giles talked about this.
And
go into it from your perspective, because Giles sort of said it wasn't moving the needle.
The reason was once we got to sort of scale and we were clearly an international business, and at this point, sort of Coca-Cola had already invested in the company. When I took over, Veg Pots it was a nice business. I think it was maybe 10 or even 11 million of turnover at the time. Reasonable margin, kind of inline margin, so it wasn't a dog, but it was just, it didn't fit the model to say, how do you roll this out to all your markets? It was a UK thing with 8 days shelf life that constantly was giving us headaches because it was made in a factory where chicken was made, but it was a veg pot. And so occasionally we'd get the Daily Mail are calling you up and saying, Mrs. B from Luton's found chicken in her veg pot.
Yeah.
And you're like, so there's a distraction for the PR team. For the technical teams, it's a massive distraction because it's kind of the high risk area, so they're spending all their energy on there rather than helping on the innovation side of drinks products that we could then roll out to multiple markets. And you couldn't roll it out to other markets. So it kind of was always going to be a nice 8 to 10 to 12 million business in the UK. And I said, okay, if we want to go from 200 to 500 million, I don't need the distraction. So I'd rather go back 12 million in terms of turnover and have the focus on other things. And that's when we were launching Super Smoothies and other things that can be so much bigger. And so sometimes you have to kind of, even if it's okay, you have to cull it, because if it doesn't quite fit your model,
yes,
it's a distraction.
How do you...
So we came to agreement with Paul, and the rest for him is history, and they've done brilliantly with Bob.
Oh, so I didn't realise that was like literally... I thought didn't realise you came to an agreement with him from Innis. I didn't realise that was how it's... Oh,
yeah. Wow. So Paul was running Veg Pots for us, and I said, I'm stopping it. And he said, well, can I do something with it? I said, yes, but not with the Innocent brand. And so we reached an agreement where basically he could take on the distribution as long as he rebranded it. And so he basically took the distribution space, rebranded it to Bowl. And
I didn't realise that was literally how that happened. Oh,
exactly.
Sorry. I thought he sort of was doing it and then quit and then set it up.
No.
Wow.
He basically took the business and rebranded it. And then that was his baseline. And then obviously he then went into... With the freedom of a different brand, there was no way I could have done, the various choices that he made. And then, ironically, he went into the sort of certain spaces and now has come back out to the kind of vegetarian space. So,
because I think what we're talking about here is really important, is the diagnosis of small bets and actually being able to have the gumption to look into the future and saying, right, this is where this could go. That isn't easy.
No,
that is really not easy.
Not easy at all.
And I think that's why one of the reasons CEOs are rewarded so highly, because it is such a hard skill to look into the future. What are some sort of questions or ways to diagnose? And this is for listeners who may be launching a new beer on a tap in a boozer in Richmond, maybe launching a new, whatever, fill in the blank. It's not easy. What are some of the ways you've learned through your experience, Douglas, to diagnose these things?
It always comes back to the fundamentals. So,
yep.
Has this thing got good margin? Has this thing got good rate of sale? And is the sort of consumer reaction to the product right in this channel? And generally what you will find is... don't look at your revenue in total, look at your individual elements through that lens, because you'll always...
Wait, sorry, say that again.
So you'll be able to convince yourself that the total picture for your company adds up. And you'll say, oh yeah, well, roughly on average, and I know food service isn't doing quite so well, but that's because... But next year will be better. And I think you have to be more brutal, breaking your underlying revenue down and assessing each bit of it, whether it's the grocery channel, whether it's the wholesale channel, whether you've got a kind of, a pub channel, whatever it may be, depending on the product, and really say, are our economics in that space correct? Is the rate of sale in that channel right? And is that showing an improving trend or a trend that we can sort of see how with investment we can kind of move forward? Whereas I think we chase the revenue to start with because we need to be a certain scale, and I think you over chase revenue. And again, when you go international, you kind of do a big deal with a new retailer. Like, I'm now in the Netherlands, I'm now in Germany. All those deals, whether they were innocent or the ones we've had at Tony's, come back to bite you 5 years later, because then retailer A gets in a buying group with retailer B in your own home market, and they realise that you've been giving this random retailer over here a better price.
Oh, what? Because the retailers speak across. I didn't realise that.
Yeah, because I mean, one of the huge challenges for European-wide FMCG now is buying groups. So, for example, Albert Heijn and Edeka in Germany are in a buying group, so they get to see each other's prices, so they can see what Tony's.
I didn't realise that.
So yeah, so buying groups. It's less so in the UK, but in international markets in Europe, these buying groups, and then they all swap with each other. So they have a huge. So you've got to be really careful.
Of information there.
Exactly. So you've got to be really careful that you chase a distribution channel. You say, oh, but I can show that we're going to be big in this country, or we're going to be big in this channel. You do but I'm a small guy, and I'll fix it later deal, and those things come back to bite you. So always build everything from day one on good fundamentals, and then the picture becomes quite clear quite quickly to say, well, I've got good fundamentals and it's working. Probably quite smart to put the money behind that bit of it, rather than trying to put the money where it's broken. And I think people get distracted by saying, well, I'll put the money there because I might lose something, rather than I might gain something by putting it behind the thing that's working. So kind of be really disciplined about stripping out the stuff that isn't working, because otherwise you'll spend money on it when you should be pouring fuel on the fire of the things that are working. And that generally comes about because you've chased revenue and scale rather than fundamentals.
Wow. Mate, that's so good. And it's like, that would just be helping so many people, because it's like, the revenue is the vanity, isn't it? It's the ego. It is. It's hard to not chase that, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. We've all been there, right? Yeah. And also the clock resets every year, but investors and shareholders and yourself, you want to beat last year's revenue number. It's just a kind of natural FMCG instinct. Everyone says, oh, well, the clock's back to zero, but we've got a mountain to climb. So every year feels like, oh God, I've got a mountain to climb. Yeah. I better not stop those things, because then the mountain's even bigger. My kind of, again, contrarian thinking is, in the last quarter of every year, go, what are we going to stop next year? And accept that I already start 2 miles further down the mountain, because I think I'll get higher on the mountain if I'm focused on the things that are working, rather than just trying to prop up the things that aren't.
Yes. What are other things that you've learned that sort of come back to bite you as you scale, or common things that people don't think about? I think the idea of the retail buying groups speaking is like, fucking hell, that's going to help a lot of people out, you know?
Yeah. I mean, exactly. Be really thoughtful when you go into new markets, and you really understand. In Europe, and it's coming to the UK now, you just got to think, I've got to have one price, particularly in grocery, across those markets. And they all talk different language. So you've also got to do the diagnosis on what do they mean? What do I mean by a matching price? There's kind of 3 tiers to each grocery pricing. So you've got to be really careful about
What do you mean by that?
Well, so net 1, net 2, net 3. Yeah. If you're a buyer, do the French talk net 2, and you've got, it's quite technical, but it's really important, because once you start scaling,
and that's like where the median and promotional spend goes, and where that
exactly what's deducted where is really important, so that you could basically look, if you do a stupid deal with a retailer in France, and at one point Tesco and Carrefour were in a buying group. If you do a deal because you're like, oh, I want, for my information memorandum, I want to show that I'm in France. You do a stupid deal there. 2 years later, Tesco are in a buying group with Carrefour and see the price you did because you wanted a bit of vanity. Wow. That's going to cost you a hell of a lot of money if your product's really working in Tesco, because they just go, thank you very much, we'll have the lowest price of the 2 retailers, and all of a sudden your core fundamentals are screwed. So that is a really important kind of commercial lesson. Talent is my other lesson. Just don't scrimp on talent. Don't do the Brits abroad strategy. Find people who have got the local capabilities, local credentials, but whose then values fit yours. And so, who can fall in love with Tony's, who can fall in love with Innocent, not the other way around. So that's that's a key
Super
piece of
interesting.
advice.
So I interviewed a guy last week who's weirdly he went to a big part of the Cambridge tech group. Not actually, his link to food was that he owns, for fun, he owns Bocca di Lupo, the restaurant in London. But like incredibly, like I think he's like a billionaire, like sold his business for 6 billion, incredibly clever. Written a book called Serendipity. It doesn't happen by accident. Like the guy's brain was like, I was like, what the fuck? I couldn't keep up with him. But one of the things he was saying, it's kind of links to what you're saying, Douglas, is you can get all those fundamentals right, which is like the best product, the best economics, the best marketing, the best packaging. But the idea, and he said he learned this when trying to sell his, he sold like these like weird antibodies, but there was a brand to it. It sounds a bit weird, but it's super interesting. But he's like, you can't just force it and shout it onto a market. That's just never going to work. And he goes, is that other piece of the puzzle that not many people think about? It's like, is this product, you have the best product, but is this the right market for it? And I suppose what you're saying, the bridge between those things is the talent and the cultural nuance on the ground. Yeah. I hadn't thought of it like that.
I just look at everything we do as like a case study. So what are my next 5 or 6 case studies? So is it a country case study? Is it how do I give myself some reassurance that if I pile the money in behind this thing, the chances of it working are much higher. And I'm not a guy, and I've not, who's the bet the house, because you can get to 1 billion in 5 minutes. I just don't think that's how FMCG works. Also, customers, there has to be in food, I think there's discovery in it. And so it's not like a widget that's online that just does this. There is just natural discovery. Again, many pitfalls that have been described before on sort of podcasts is people chasing too much distribution too early and then paying the price for that. I'm a great believer in that. Even if you're our scale, I don't want to take a new product. Typically when we launch a new product, we will say, right, the first year, let's do it in one retailer. Let's really prove that it works. Let's really understand where it's working, where it's not working. You can concentrate your marketing investment behind one retailer. And then year 2, then you've got a read on rate of sale, so your supply chain doesn't buy too much product in advance or filling or whatever it may be. And then you can really go for it with some understanding. So I'd much rather it be 3, 4, 5 million in Tony's case in year 1, knowing that I can place my bets much more clearly in year 2 as to what the scale is.
Case studies almost the diagnosis. Which is where we're going to put the money because. Yeah.
So I instead of doing one big bet a year, I do 5 case studies and back 2 of them big time for the following year. That's kind of, in essence, is my
genius.
My growth strategy. And whether that's a product, whether that's a country, or whether that's doubling down on a marketing campaign that's worked, that's how I have scaled the Innocent business and how we're scaling Tony's. So it is messier. It's more complicated. You've got more things going on. And if people look at the business and go, oh, well, shouldn't you do less? I'm like, I can, but I can't actually give you the same risk and growth confidence because the messiness gives me more confidence that, and you then you're then following the rough rules of average of like 2 out of 5 are going to work, and then you're going to get lucky with something you're not expecting that's just going to work.
It's the whole explore, like the whole barbell strategy of explore versus exploit. And again, it's what this bloke was telling me. Like he was talking about bees, random, right? But bees, when they're looking for honey, they'll like 70% of them will go and focus on getting the honey. But these other 20%, they're called dangle bees, will like dance over here saying this could be the new thing. And that's essentially like there's a law of nature that works in business as well, which is you got to explore, get your case studies, make your small bets, but once you know what's working is fucking exploit and quadruple down and throw money at it. Yeah,
absolutely. And you've got to kill the stuff that hasn't worked, because also the danger is
kill your babies. Yeah,
the danger is that you let them hang on, and that's the space you need to do the next.
Was there an example of where you did cling on to you? Like Stephen King, the writer, calls it, you've got to kill your babies, as in the bits that you absolutely love but don't add to the story.
Not to. I think Innocent, as I said, the shelf life just helped us because it was just like it was so sort of clear that you kind of had to stop. So in a way, it was a kind of self-built indiscipline. the CFO would be exploding if you kind of held on to the failures too long. I think at Tony's, I don't think there's one where I've said, oh, we've hung on to that. There are products that you've got to decide, are we backing it or are we going? And yeah, I don't think there's one that springs to mind from Tony's right now, but let's see. I think that's my job to sort of make sure that we do create the space.
What I find really interesting about your journey, Douglas, is that you came from like a marketing director background. What would you say are your 1 to 3 sort of principles about marketing these big brands?
So
again, they can be contrarian, they can be obvious.
I'm not a marketeer by background. So
right.
So I mean, I started in corporate finance, right? So I was a sort of doing M&A of all things to start with. I then went to FreeServe and did kind of corporate development innovation. I spent a year as marketing director at Innocent.
That's right. That's why I read that.
More as a rite of passage to then the CEO job than because I'm a marketeer at heart. However, when I was at FreeServe,
FreeServe was...
Oh, you're too young, my goodness. So it was the big challenger brand in the internet. So it was basically it was owned by Dixon's. We did the free dial-up CDs that basically, it was the AOL of the time.
Wow, okay.
Completely disrupted the market because instead of paying for a subscription, it was dial-up and we got revenue from the telephone. Anyway, so it was the kind of hot.com float of 1999, believe it or not.
Sure.
I mean, it was, and got into the FTSE 100 with 100 employees. I mean, it was one of those kind of mad stories. So I'd been through that entrepreneurial journey with them. And during that time, whilst I was kind of the finance guys and we were looking to do kind of M&A deals, and I'd come into that company to do that, I, at a workshop, met Adam Morgan, who was coming in to make, we were a challenger brand and we were doing challenger brand workshops with Adam and Hugh Derrick from Eat Big Fish. And they turned on a light bulb in my head about what marketing is and what isn't. And so I've kind of been a disciple of Eat Big Fish and challenger brand marketing ever since. And so through my career, I guess I've drawn the sort of marketing world towards me, but very much through that lens of being a challenge brand, having a very clear point of difference, having, everything they talked about resonated with why I then went to Innocent, why I've gone to Tony's, because, proving that things can be done differently and better is, I think, part of my sort of DNA. And then, I guess a lot of my marketing philosophy, if you like, comes from, that thinking of being a challenger, creating that point of difference. I guess where I'm maybe contrarian in terms of, how I see it. I don't see this kind of, take the big bet strategy with marketing as the right approach. I think finding your path through multiple avenues, being a challenger, thinking differently about why consumers think, why they think, thinking about, why does something like the Big Knit work, thinking about why does Tony's, a brand that's very focused around changing a supply chain, talks a lot about child labor, is very transparent about all the things going on in its supply chain. Why does that resonate with the consumer? What's the point of differences that come about from that? That's what excites me from a marketing point of view. Doing, big TV campaigns and putting up lots of posters is kind of just not. Sometimes it's needed, and we did a fair amount of that at Innocent, and it was always the stuff that I kind of went.
So what are those? So again, sorry, I didn't excuse my research.
No.
But I actually think it's because I've never sat opposite anyone with this. You've got such a unique perspective, Douglas, and I've never, honestly, the ability to almost hold the tension of these big macro pillars and principles of different things, but then also like the texture and the nuance of being on the ground. What would you say are some of those, as you said, you sort of soaked in from Adam? The one that he really stuck with me when I interviewed him was it's not about being different or better. It's about doing both. like you got to do both. What are some of those other ones? I know you said thinking. Why do consumers think?
So two things. Another one of his sort of favorite phrases is intelligent naivety. And I think Innocent was built on intelligent naivety, where you kind of ask that question of, well, why not? But just because it's an industry norm, why can't our cocoa supply chain be run differently? Why can't you find a model where you actually pay farmers a reasonable living income and make a business model out of it? Why not? That's exactly what the journalists who founded Tony's back in 2005, they asked that question as journalists, and they actually accidentally stumbled into a business. And everybody at Tony's has been asking ever since, like, why can't you do that iteration after iteration? Because it's bloody hard. Yeah, we've discovered that, but we still believe that we're trying to prove that premise. So that's sort of part of it, of being a bit naive, because otherwise everyone just tells you, well, it can't be done. Like, otherwise the big companies would have already done it. It's like, well, that's not the case. So kind of pushing against the sort of the wisdom of the crowd, I think, is really important. I guess the second big one is I do believe in marketing investment where you can't measure stuff. I am a believer in kind of the. I've never been a CEO who says, show me the return on investment spreadsheet, this kind of performance marketing outside of a kind of direct transaction in e-commerce. In FMCG, you can prove very, very little. You can convince yourself you know why things are working. And so I think as a CEO, and by falling in love with marketing, it's enabled me to be a better CEO, because I'm not constantly on their tail saying, prove it works, prove that money you put on those posters did something for the company. I'm looking at the richness of what those teams are doing and saying, yeah, I think that's good enough over multiple years. And if you don't, then you hold people to sort of a standard, and you have to agree, what you're trying to achieve, but trying to measure the pound return. I think if you're a CEO who's like that, it's really hard for a marketing team to kind of, again, have that fear of remove the fear, the sort of fear of failure or the fear of accountability. Not that the marketer shouldn't be accountable for good work, but you kind of got to agree the parameters of what good looks like, which often isn't in the numbers or proving that it moved a rate of sale thing. So at Innocent, we invested heavily behind the brand. There was never a direct path back to did it work or didn't it work. But I'm a believer that marketing does work, done well over multiple years. And I think that's if you're in this role trying to make everybody justify everything, which maybe I would have been if I hadn't seen their perspective, because I came from a kind of financial background. It's like, prove it in the spreadsheet and prove it afterwards in the spreadsheet. I think you hit a brick wall, and so I've always, I guess, bought a blend of sort of intuition and financial background. I always talk about one of the best things I ever did, because whilst I did sort of corporate finance M&A, I was like all the people at KPMG put on the balance sheet cash flow P&L course that you basically get all this stuff drilled into you. And I see that as one of my superpowers, because understanding the financial interplay between cash flow, balance sheets and profit and loss, it amazes me today how many very senior people don't understand that.
About that. Again, that's not my skill set at all. Like, I'm really bad at numbers. I'm just like, fuck it. But like, what are some of the first principle basics about that, as you said, even some big Donnies right now don't necessarily understand it. Like, and it's surprising.
Well, because people, if they don't understand, ultimately, particularly a lot of your listeners in that kind of founder world, it's all about cash, not about what your P&L says, because cash is the real game in terms of, people can have a P&L, profit and loss, where the revenue looks good, but if your cost of capital, you're kind of, in our case, in Tony's, we buy our beans about a year ahead of when we sell them. So we're financing those beans 12 months out. I don't actually get paid for those. I sell them 12 months later. Then Sainsbury's or Tesco's will pay me 60 days after that. So that's a year and a half where if I'm scaling really, really fast, I've paid a lot of cash and I'm not getting paid for a year and a half for that. You've got to understand that that's a really important dynamic. My P&L looks good because I've bought it for this and I'm going to sell it for that and I'm making a profit, but I could be bankrupt because I haven't got the cash to sort of keep buying the beans ahead of when I'm being paid. So those kind of dynamics are really important. And also for me, understanding the numbers also helps you diagnose risk, because when you play around with those numbers, it sees, well, if I move that parameter on the cost of the let's call it the caramel, that really hurts profitability if that moves a lot. Whereas the paper packaging can move by 50% and it doesn't really change the economics. So what am I going to do when I actually get to implement something? I'm going to pay damn close attention to the fact that we have to get the caramel at the price it says in the assumptions, because if we don't, this thing won't stack up. So again, for me, diagnosing risk, managing risk, seeing the risk before you actually start executing stuff by playing around with the numbers, and then me as CEO or the senior team paying damn close attention to the top 3 things that really move the numbers around to make sure they're executed really well. And if the paper costs 20% more, I'm not lying awake worrying about that. And it's in these small things really are the differences between a business that really works and a really doesn't. Because you'll have talked to so many founders, right, that said, it so nearly worked. It just didn't quite work on the unit economics. It didn't. So we had to, in the end, we battled it. So the margins are so fine that if you're not, not everyone's expected to, I came with that experience and I'm not a founder, and we can talk about that maybe differently as to why I sort of chose to do the path I chose. But if that's not your game, you need someone right alongside you who
gets the finance.
I don't know if you've had Paul on the show, but Paul at Bowl will tell you that's not his game, but he's got Ed right alongside him, who's absolutely the game, and it's a blended skill set. That's why Rich, Adam, and John were so amazing, because they just had this incredible complementary skill sets. They were kind of the perfect FMCG human, but there were 3 of them, and they were friends and they made it work. But they had that perfect blend. And so, if you're a founder, understand what your strengths are, but don't think then, well, I'll build the business around my strengths. FMCG doesn't build itself around you. You've got to build your company around FMCG. So goddamn, make sure you've got the complementary talent around you. Otherwise, those fine margins.
When you say these little fine things, like is it kind of just the I don't know. Again, I'm just acting sort of dumb here, but so say, as you say, in the price of the caramel could be the shift in your business that takes.
Yeah, but that could be in the numbers. So have some good numbers, but it could also be in I didn't realize social media. I don't know anything about social media. I didn't realize social media worked like that, and I've spent the last year thinking that Google AdWords were the place to spend my money, and we've just spent all that money that those shareholders gave us, and we said we're going to give them fast growth on Google AdWords, and actually we should have spent it over here. So whatever it is, across the, how does the supply chain work? How does the finance work? How does the brand work? Typically, a founder will come with one of those skill sets. Make sure you complement with the other skill sets, because if you're missing those are holes in your business that might be the difference between you succeeding and you failing. And so I think people underestimate. I think some of the best founders have complemented themselves with the right talent at a very early stage, even if that has come at a price of equity or a high cash cost in the business. I think it's the best place you can spend your money.
Well, I love this. It's the barbell strategy of intense, sort of small bets, case studies, and then diagnosis. But then from that bigger picture that you were talking about earlier, mate, of like the brand marketing, innovation rollout, geography. Like it's just mate. How do you deal with all this information? Because I interviewed. I don't even know the really interesting brand, kind of slightly different category, but Gosney pizza ovens. I don't know if you've seen them. Like they've just gone massive in the States. And Tom Gosney's a founder, and they've built a huge business. I think £200 million business. Started just hustling, making pizza ovens. But he said, every day as a CEO and a sort of CEO founder, you feel business is basically you've got 1,000 missiles coming towards your head. Your game plan is just to try and stay calm like Buddha, but how do you deal with those 1,000 missiles coming towards your head? And that could be people coming to you, problems, the cocoa prices, something the retailers are speaking to each other. There's a panoply of different problems, right? How do you sort of stay calm and zen within that?
I think 2 things. One, again, with the approach that I take, I've never bet the house on one individual thing. So I kind of like, if I've got a problem somewhere, have I got a little path out with the other things? Are they working well enough to kind of make up for the failure over there? I think the second part of it is who are your shareholders, and what lens do they have on the business? Because I've always been fortunate enough to be in scenarios where my shareholders think long term. And so I think if you're a CEO, and not so much as if you're not a founder, if you're like me, you're a CEO, you're effectively delivering for employees, delivering for the mission, delivering for shareholders is kind of how I see it. If your shareholders are misaligned with my lens on how I like to build businesses, which is over a kind of 3 to 5 year kind of plan and window to say, look, these are the things we're going to do. We may be here in 6 months' time, or we might be a bit further behind, but then we might shoot forward if, the first bets don't work, but the second two don't. If you've got shareholders who are prepared to kind of be patient with you, that also helps, because then they're not on you going, well, you promised this in 3 months' time. I think I can solve most problems over 18, 24 months. I can't solve everything over 6 months. So you take the shareholder situation, the Cocoa situation we've got right now, that's a 50 million cost tsunami on our business, on a business that's only turnover of 240 million. That's just extraordinary. So the sort of profit growth that I deliver my shareholders has been eaten up by this cocoa price change. And yet I'm calm because I know I've got a shareholder who understands that in the long term, we're building a properly robust scaled business, and therefore their return will come. So be really, again, in the same way that I've said, be really thoughtful about who you've got around you to complement you. The other piece of advice is be really, really thoughtful about who you choose as shareholders. If as a founder selling a chunk, or even if you come into a business like me, what are your shareholder motivations? Over what time scale are you going to hold you to account? And almost I look at it and go, if things are going a bit pear-shaped for 12 months, are they the kind of people that will understand that and understand the logic of that? Or will they just be like, we don't care, we're finance guys, you promised this by this day, it's not here. That creates a very different pressure. Ultimately, have you got people on your team? Have you got people that will live and breathe with you? And then back to the employee part of this, also, have you got employees that will stick with you? Because if you've kind of been very transactional with your employees, the minute things get a little bit sticky, watch them fly out the door. Whereas if you're much more, what I would say, sort of values and mission led, and kind of create an environment of this is a fun place to work, as well as, we're doing amazing work. When things are a bit sticky, they stick with you too. So I think the way I stay calm, and my God, I've faced a million different challenges, is by making sure the context around you is right. Because then it feels like you're on the team, and it's not like this is all about me and whether I'm going to fail. It's like, we're all in the shit here, guys. How are we all going to get out of this? Shareholders being a bit reasonable about the expected timeline. Employees saying, yeah, we'll roll up our sleeves, not just from to our elbow to our shoulder now to get through this. And you being calm and directional, and also making decisions, where things need to be dealt with, whether it's an employee that's not delivering and therefore polluting the barrel, you have to deal with that. Whether it's a bit of the business that you've hung on too long and you need to stop it. So you're all contributing to solving the problem. And I've always felt, both at Innocent and at Tony's, it's not all on me. But I've been quite thoughtful about the context to create that environment. This is the way that I would say it.
I think what I loved, the delicious piece of nuance there, is when you extend the time horizons, it allows you to stay much calmer.
Yeah.
I never even thought of it like that. Because it's like when you're like, oh God, we're hemorrhaging 50, we're getting, as you said, a cash cost tsunami with 50 million.
Yeah.
Right. Like if that time frame of where you're looking, the sort of the telescope into the future is short, you're thinking, fuck me, this tsunami is going to wipe out this pirate ship, right? If you extend it, it almost takes away the height of the wave, and it's like, well, actually, it's much smaller, we can override it. I love that, because I think the amount of people, both my mates who are in this industry, and you look so short term of like, if we don't get into Sainsbury's by this year, or if this goes wrong now, then it's like, if you just extend out, and also it means you can be a bit more careful. Everything you're saying about how you deploy your cash, how you put these small bets, like extending the time horizon makes you calmer. When you said like, What has been the hardest problem you've faced?
I mean, I've as I said, I just did the speech. And
It's this cocoa stuff.
yeah,
What's going on with that? Sorry. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
two bad harvests in a row,
Yeah.
and as we've been saying for years and trying to prove otherwise, underinvestment in the farmers means that when there were two bad harvests as a result of kind of dry seasons, a crop that hadn't been looked after properly at a macro scale, and lack of use of fertilizer and all the rest of it, because the farmers are living in absolute poverty because in general they're not getting a good return for their cocoa. It meant the crop yields were down 30% for broadly 2 years in a row, which spiked the price from kind of 2,000 to 10,000 on the world market. So all of a sudden, if you're in my shoes, I'm investing in all these programs to support the farmers, but I have to still buy on the world market the pricing, and suddenly I'm paying 4 or 5 times for my cocoa. I can't just put my chocolate bar up on shelf by 4 times, or the cocoa portion of it, so say 2 times. So you have to put some price into the market, and all the chocolate companies put a lot of price into the market. That as a one-off, you go, okay, we can manage it, we can put price through to consumers, but the combination effect of that plus tariffs plus currency movements has just been a triple whammy for our business. Now, I'm growing a lot, so again, I can cope if my shareholders are in a place to say, yeah, look, we understand that instead of the growth delivering more profit through to the shareholders, it's effectively allowing you to stand still. So it's not like I'm going backwards from a profitability point forward, I'm just not going forward. So again, with a reasonable set of shareholders who see the big picture over 5 years, that's a situation you can all cope with. Not ideal. Doesn't mean that there's not difficult conversations to be had about, okay, but where are you trimming your sales to make sure that if this carries on, if this is the new normal, how do you cope? What are the things? But those are manageable conversations. So again, as I said, I think it's every year something's going to be thrown at you. An employee issue, a financial issue. Who's the team around you? How do you draw advice? I never see myself as the kind of, I have to solve this. It's like, who have I got around me that can help solve this? And I think, talk about, everyone says, oh, CEO's a really lonely place. I've never really found that to be the case, because I always go, well, I've got these 3 people I'm going to ask over here, and I've got these 3 people contacts I'm going to ask. You've got to be able to make a decision. You've got to be able to kind of take information in, take advice in, and then make a decision. But if you're sitting there thinking, oh, I can't, asking somebody for advice is a sign of weakness, then you're screwed. I think then you're you're in a really lonely place. I always just go, who are the 8 people I can ask quickly for smart advice, and then let's make a decision.
The extending the time horizon equals calm, and the realizing you're not lonely equals calm. I've never sort of thought of it like that. There's a great podcast called Founders, and one of the questions he always says founders ask themselves more often is, which resource am I currently not using enough of? And basically the reason he asks that is because you've always got someone to ask, or there's always a resource you're not currently using enough to solve X problem. And I think what you've said there, Douglas, is a beautiful way of putting it. What are like?
I think it's about vulnerability.
Yeah.
You've got to kind of admit to yourself you don't know all the answers. 2, you've got to not be afraid to say, shit, like, I don't think I actually know what the right thing to do is here. And sometimes it's actually asking some of your more junior employees. So let me give you an example. The kind of 2020 kind of lockdown, everything that was going on. I got quite a lot of criticism internally that we were kind of stuck in our own bubble. The George Floyd thing had just happened.
So at this point, this
was innocent. I was in we were all locked up at home.
Yeah.
But the George Floyd event in the US had happened.
Yeah.
And basically they were like, you're being tone deaf to the impact that's having on employees. So when Brexit had happened, yes, we were in the office, but we'd walked the floors. There were a lot of people in our London office who were very upset. I've been very visible about leadership. When the George Floyd thing happened, I just completely missed that it was a thing for our employees in the UK. But I had, a lot of employees who felt very personal about what was going on, and I completely missed it. And at that point, I had to sort of go, I'm feeling all this criticism coming towards me and the leadership team for not kind of responding and showing empathy or whatever. But I just don't understand what I've missed. And therefore, at that point, I was sitting down with sort of employees in our sort of D&I team saying, just explain this to me. And going forward, what I commit to you is that, one, you can flag this stuff to me. If the stuff I've got blind spots on, I need to have a network inside the business, not just of the people around me who are like, oh, Douglas, you're wonderful because you're the CEO, who are saying, don't be aware of this, be conscious of that, who are waving little flags, warning signs at you to say there's a bit of unhappiness or you're not showing the right sort of sense of understanding. And obviously, as I get older as well, my kind of understanding of what is important to 20-year-olds inside my business gets further and further away from probably the reality. So again, not just shareholders and team around you, have you got your feelers in the business where I can vulnerably go to someone quite junior and saying, I'm like, what should I do? What's the right thing to do here? That you have to think about who you pull on, and that's where building affinity groups inside your business around whatever topics, they're really good for sort of raising awareness inside the company. They're brilliant for a CEO because they're a safe space for me to go to that affinity group and say, shit, I need some education on this topic. And if you're sitting in my shoes, what decision would you make here in this context? So
there's a great quote which I love, which is in Will Godara's book, Unreasonable Hospitality. He was like, people at the top or high up in the organisation often have all the authority but not much of the information.
Yeah.
People at the juniors at the bottom of the organisations have all the information but none of the authority. And it's like that's the kind of attention because the people on the ground, they are the people there who understand what's the cultural relevance of X, Y, Z. I suppose you're creating this tether between you need to pull someone aside, what's going on with this, and that sort of closes the gap between authority and information.
More importantly, their elbow. They feel, even though they're probably relatively junior, they feel like they can elbow me and say, have you spotted this? More than because if it's down to me asking the questions,
how did you create that environment?
So I think that's what I was saying.
I've worked in companies where there is that huge gap.
Where affinity groups came about, inside Innocent and we're building them inside Tony's.
So what is an affinity group?
Affinity group. So whether it's about culture, whether it's LGBTQ, so groups of people that basically we give some resources to effectively educate the business and also be a kind of two-way dialogue with us about LGBTQ issues or whatever it may be. So there's a sense of, and their job is to, effectively help educate the business around these topics. But they're also, as I said, brilliant for me because then I know the two or three people that who've actively joined that, want to lead it. They want to make a difference. And therefore I feel like I can go to them and say, like, I don't know much about this topic. And as CEO, you're expected in some ways to be this all-encompassing person that knows everything and should do and has perfect intuition on what to do in every... It's bullshit, right? You're a human that has limited capacity. So it's back to, again, who the hell do you talk to? Or who do you have around that says, I think Douglas is missing this, I'm going to go and tell him. And create this environment that they know that that's safe to do with me, and I'm not going to dismiss them or I'm not going to make them feel small and say, well, that's not really important because I've got shareholders to deal with and they're really important. It's like, no, that stuff's really important. So part of the reason I loved Innocent, and we've got it at Tosu, that nobody has offices. I've never had a desk for the last 15 years. I've not had a desk because every opportunity when I'm not in a meeting, and that's sadly not enough time, I'm sitting pretty close to the coffee machine with my laptop working and making sure that I'm somewhere where the people are flowing past me. So when I'm doing my work, so that the most valuable thing I can do is have conversation with people, not finesse my PowerPoint slide. And so just making sure that I'm visible and I'm actively going, oh, what's going on? Tell me, because you say the more senior you get, the less truth actually comes to you.
This David podcast was the guy last week, David Cleavey, talked all about serendipity. Doesn't happen by accident, right?
Yeah.
This happens on a micro level, happens on a macro level, like the Lunar Society, which was in Birmingham back in all those days, which was basically the cross section of all the innovation and basically forged the Industrial Revolution. He was basically saying, you want. There'd be an artist speaking to a merchant, speaking to like an industrialist, but all this cross pollination of ideas and, as you say, conversations is really important. The sort of, and what he's basically arguing in the book is you can create this serendipity and this be really purposeful about it. You see it everywhere. It's like, why is London fashionable? For example, why is Ibiza so big for house music? It's like it's these networks and this, as you see, it doesn't happen by accident, and it's this putting people in these lanes where all the ideas come. And even in the book, he says, don't have a desk, and it's by put yourself by the coffee machine, allow the serendipity to happen, because you're going to get access to all these conversations.
And you're only one thread of that. And so two very practical tips.
Yes.
When we designed the office at Tony's and we moved office a couple of years ago, the Dutch love their coffee. And I saw the first designs and it was like, coffee machine in this corner, coffee machine in that corner. Like, I'll make sure that no one has to go very far for a coffee and that's good. And I just joined the company and I said, we're having one coffee machine and it's going to be here in the business. And there was kind of like, everyone looked at me like, you're insane. There's going to be a riot. Like, one coffee machine for the whole company. Why? Because then everybody has to get off their backsides and walk up through the office to the coffee machine. And then they've taken the time to walk the coffee machine. So they're going to kind of decompress. Then they're going to meet someone from a different team.
Yes.
Then they're going to have a conversation. So think about the design of your office. I'm a great believer in inefficiency inside an office space, because if you have inefficiency inside your office space, people are up and talking to each other and bumping into each other and saying, "Oh, Bob, I've been meaning to talk to you, but I've never got round to sending you an email, funny enough. But now I've seen you and we're chatting by the coffee. I've got this. Can you help me?" So inefficiency in your office design is so important to create kind of movement inside the space. Yeah. And again, I stole quite a few of those things from the way that Fruit Towers was designed. The second thing, we give everyone a really nice lunch. And, and so guess what? Everyone's having lunch together, and you go, "Oh my God, that's very generous!" Like, so kind of
what's
new
lunch. Sorry, I'm not.
Well, no, but as in, is salads and so.
What, we get it in from Deliveroo or like.
No. So in the Amsterdam office where we've got 200 people, we've got someone making it every day. So you've got a nice kind of what I would call salady and bits lunch.
Yeah.
That's free. That people and here it's a combination of people bringing in stuff and an outside caterer sort of bringing some stuff that's then left on the side. And guess what? Everyone has lunch together, and guess what? You end up sitting next to someone from a different team, and you're creating that kind of bonds that are more than your department. Again, at Innocent, and again now at Tony's, sports clubs, we say, right, you pay half and we'll pay half. So if the climbing club costs 200 quid, you get 10 off everyone, that's 200 quid, and we'll put 200 quid, and then you kind of got a club going, and that means you can sort of have slightly subsidised climbing. But that means the bloke in finance that likes climbing, with the person in marketing that likes climbing, they're coming together to do activities together. So you're building this kind of strength inside an organisation by breaking out silos. That's, again, key to kind of culture and all of those things. They're really, really cheap. If you say, how do you build culture? It's not pay consultants £1 million to write some nice words, or it's like find the things that people like doing and facilitate them. And fun can never come from the top down. It has to come, fun and engagement. Like, give them the conditions to come up with the things that they want to do. Bung them 50 quid to go and work out what they want to do, and stuff happens much more organically than the CEO deciding what fun looks like.
No, it's this again linking. It's kind of weird how I did that interview last week, but his whole book is how you create networks where it could be on a micro, i.e. like this office in Richmond. So David was very instrumental in the Cambridge network, which is basically the UK's equivalent of Silicon Valley.
Right, yeah.
So what he basically says is it goes, get out of silos. So he goes, he'll have Cambridge University professors speaking to health tech people, speaking to artists, and he details a story how he was, again, serendipity doesn't happen by accident. He was at a party, a tech guy was next to Stephen Fry. Stephen Fry recommended him to read a book, which changes his trajectory. And it's like that, and then he's written this book, but that happens on micro levels. And that's weirdly the fact that you've brought this up. That was one of the things I was going to ask you about was office design, and actually how I think it's one of the most underrated and unthought about things.
Completely.
And I think it is where you basically want to build a theme park of purpose and a theme park of brand for your employees. And that's really how it is all the small details. So like I went to Innocent, when I was at Manulife, did a sampling there. So even the fact it's called the Fruit Towers, it's like that could be so superfluous to so many people, but like that allows the missions to soak in.
Yep.
Even walking in here today, and I was sort of being maybe a bit of a stalker, but I was just taking pictures because I was like, fuck, like all the employees on that back wall, and it's like it's got that someone who's been here for 5 years there.
Yep.
The notebooks are all brand, like the missions like kind of plastered everywhere. What you said about having one coffee machine, like what have you learned about office design other than just the coffee machine? Because I think there's probably loads of lessons. And how do you think that's kind of an unfair, unseen advantage in building purpose-led brands?
A couple of things. One, instead of giving a PowerPoint presentation, when it had somebody new would come and same at sort of in Tony's in Amsterdam, but certainly at Fruit Towers, I made sure that and Rich and others before me, the stories that you wanted to tell, whether it was about the foundation, whether it was about the mission, whether it was about what on the walls. So what I would do is, whoever they were, whether they were bankers in suits or Sainsbury's, whatever, I'd meet them at the door, and then I'd spend an hour and a half with them, walking around the building, talking, saying, "Look at this, look at like," and then you've got a story or an important point you want to make about the business. Weirdly, what that also does is people are proud that you're telling all these stories and you're doing it for. So people are sitting at their desks while I'm doing this, so they're seeing my pride in telling the story about the company. I think that does something. The second, the timeline up the wall at Fruit Towers, and again we have it at Tony's. I always thought that was great for that storytelling. What I really realised, it's really great for accelerating people who join the company because it's got the story of like all the different things, the kind of key moments of the history of the business. What I realised was that then they see that every day. And when they hear me or somebody else say, "Oh, do you remember that event we had, or when we did fruit stock, or when we..." And after about 6 months, they kind of know all the stories. They've also got the visual pictures of it. And they kind of almost think that they were there. So the kind of the speed at which you kind of make them drink the Kool-Aid, so to speak, I think accelerates by having a very visual space that's linked not just to here's the latest brand message, but is the kind of history of the company. I think it inducts employees in a much deeper way than your induction is booked at 4 till 6 o'clock. Where you're going to be told about the IT network. I think it's a really good accelerant for people feeling part of a company as much as anything, the visual piece. And then, as I said, the inefficiency of design is what I love. It's like, how do people crash into each other on the stairs?
The inefficiency of design ironically makes them efficient when it comes to coming up with ideas.
Well, because the
serendipity.
Yeah, because creativity is ultimately everything. And conversations that you sort of half want to have but can't be bothered to write an email about, your curiosity part of your brain doesn't allow you to go, well, I'm going to send Bob an email and I know he's got to respond. Whereas your curiosity point, where you met him at coffee machine, you say, "Oh, I'd been meaning to ask you." And if he gives you an interesting answer, your thought process then goes on to, now I really have got an idea because Bob's confirmed my little pet theory. But you're not going to write Bob an email about that because it's kind of like, it's sort of a bit of a theory going on in my brain. So again, how do people, and then, as you grow globally, how do you then stop the countries becoming siloed.
Okay, let's get on to, and this is what David says, is he goes the learnings from Silicon Valley to Cambridge. Again, that's his example of applying the tech into the macro. How do you do that on a country level? Because that's where it gets really juicy.
Again, I mean, every year at Innocent, we had a big party where we brought all the global teams together, and everyone goes, "You did what?" It was the best £1,000 per head that I spent every single year. Why? Because if I put £1,000 on everyone's paycheck, they'd still moan that they were underpaid and work too hard and all the rest of it. You put £1,000 and say, "We're going to Mallorca for the nature weekend this time," and you announce it at the beginning of the year in January. In June, the whole company from all over the world, we're all going to meet in Mallorca. We're going to have 2 days of very important meetings while the tax man checks that it's a meeting, and then we're going to have a big party. Everyone spends 6 months getting excited about that. You have an amazing few days, and then everyone spends another 3 months talking about it, and then 2 months after that, you're announcing the next one. That's £1,000 worth of gold you've just spent. Whereas if you put it in their paycheck and go there, that's what creates loyalty.
It's the anticipation of where I read somewhere was like, if you want to be happy, book a long last minute holidays don't make you as happy as like a holiday 3 months out, because the anticipation of an event which increases our dopamine and happiness, it's going to fucking to Selfridges to buy a new pair of sunnies, a new pair of board shorts, whatever. Maybe not board shorts, but you know what I mean. But it's the anticipation. I suppose again, another piece of nuance of this is it's like, do things that don't scale for consumers, i.e. Innocent, nudge stock, fruit stock, but also do it for your employees, because as you say, an extra bag on someone's paycheck is not going to really move the needle, but the happiness they're going to do if you take them to Mallorca for a week.
Yeah, in January this year, it's called the Carnival at Tony's. We're again bringing everybody together, but again, particularly I think if there is, as you scale, the empathy that comes from having time together, making sure that those teams mix, rather than the US team saying, well, this is what works for the US, and those guys over Europe are supposed to be different for us. Put people in a room face to face together, get them to talk to each other, and all the nuance that gets lost on Teams calls and email, kind of amazingly how quickly that dissipates. So yes, it's good from a kind of, this is a cool company to work for, but then from my point of view, my kind of more important mission is it raises empathy about how hard it is to build a business like that. So the US guys over a beer are talking to about why innovation's hard, or why it takes 12 months. Because of I hadn't thought of that. Whereas you're never going to have that exchange on email. And so you by guess what, community that know each other have much more empathy and much more forgiveness than communities that don't talk to each other and don't work. It's the same principle inside a business. So do everything you can to afford to basically strategies to drive empathy. The best one I've found is bring them all together and give them a big party whilst subtly giving them opportunities to mix on topics around the mission or the purpose or whatever it may be. That all of those things are just,
I didn't realise, but I'd never drawn the link between strategies to build empathy for, like, I always saw it as kind of and there's probably two layers to this, is one in terms of employees being happier in the workplace, but also strategies to build empathy, because the more people know how hard problems are in different countries, the more actually is actually a growth strategy as much as anything.
Yeah, I mean,
I'd never thought of it like that. I never put the link between empathy and growth.
Yeah, it's not. It's. I mean, it works on many levels, because it is a reward, a thanks for the hard work.
Yeah,
it is fun, and what a cool company. But it has a real purpose to it, where I go, that's where I get my return on £1,000 per head incredibly quickly.
So I feel like with specifically the bar, I feel like sometimes CEOs have to wear like this wrapper around them, and I know your bar is kind of like broken and fragmented. How are you broken and fragmented, and how do you have to use the CEO as a wrapper around that?
Not sure I fully get the question, but for me, again, I think our bar is unequally divided. To kind of raise the point about the inequality in the chocolate supply chain. So it's a very visual cue for consumers and all the rest of it. I think if you want to use it inside the business, we're by far from perfect, and we spent, even today, we sit on a model that we think is scaling, is proving that it can work, but it's taken us 20 years to get there. There've been many false starts. There's been many learnings. So we're constantly trying things, seeing that they don't work, starting again, building scale. So again, in the UK, people think of Tony's as kind of a 5, 6, 7-year-old brand. We're just about to celebrate our 20th anniversary this year. So, there's and through the kind of supply chain build, the bit that we sort of deeply care about, we've gone from not having a clue that, how you sort of begin this thing. This was 3 journalists that did a documentary about inequalities in the supply chain. As part of that documentary, they created some bars to demonstrate it could be done as a gimmick, as a sort of thing for the documentary, and realized they started they could actually sell them, and then this business was formed. But the mission came first, and then the business came later. So then you're like, God, we've told everybody, why aren't they doing it? We've now created this company. Shit, we've got to do it. And so then that's 20 years of incredibly hard work, and now, backed by, we've been very data-led to show that everything that we did, what was working, what was not working. We've now got a scale model called Tony's Open Chain that works, but we've still got much more to prove. Will it work at the next level of scale? What are the things within it that could be better? Our productivity program's good, but it's probably not best in class. So how do you, the child labour stuff is probably best in class. The traceability is best in class. So
talk to me about the
edit and improve these things.
Talk to me about the problem in the supply chain that these journalists discovered.
So
and then almost so like I want to get into the open chain, because I think that's a really interesting idea of like co-opetition, which is like competition and cooperation at the same time. Because isn't like, I swear Waitrose's chocolate bar is part of your...
Absolutely.
Which on shelf is a competitor. Okay, sick. So go into the context.
So the context is that in 2000, there was a recognition from the industry through a thing called the Harkin-England Protocol that child labour was rife in the cocoa supply chain. 1.5 million, well, that's 0.3 million children working in child labour. Totally unacceptable, against the laws of the local countries, not just kind of by Western standards. Kids, as young as 4 or 5, using big machetes to cut cocoa, carrying big heavy loads. Why? Not because the farmers think that's fun. The farmers want to send their kids to school, let's be really, really clear. But they're not getting sufficient value, payment for their cocoa, so they can't afford to employ workers on the farms to do the pruning, to do the harvesting. So they have no choice, if they want to get cash from their crop, but to get their kids to do that. So their kids aren't going to school, they're working on the farm. So you've got this subsistence farming that drives child labour. Why? Because
like a negative reinforcement loop.
Because they're not getting a living income price. So
what countries is this?
So 60% of the world's cocoa comes out of Ghana and the Ivory Coast. So this is typically a West Africa focused crop. I mean, incredibly concentrated in West Africa as a crop. So there is other parts of the world, but this issue is a West Africa, where 65% of the world's cocoa comes from. So these journalists said it must be possible to do this a different way, to pay the farmers a living income that allows their children to go to school, that allows you to kind of then improve productivity and yield, as well as paying a higher price. That's then a positively reinforcing circle. So how do you go from the negative cycle that we were just touching on to a positively reinforcing cycle? Sounds easy in practice, where there's no traceability of beans. These beans just kind of come out of the bush and are bought at the trait. So the thought of then saying, well, how do you trace that back to every single farm? How do you introduce traceability? These were sort of huge questions. What we've shown is that you can implement full traceability for every single bean. And once you know your farmer, you can start having a relationship with them. We know that you have to build and support co-ops, so where a bunch of farmers come together and sell to you. You have to give those farmers, 5-year contracts to say, we're going to pay this premium, this living income premium to you over 5 years. In return, we want to do child remediation programs. We want to go and measure the child labour in your supply chain and help you bring it down. If you do all of those things, and as I said, it's taken us 15, 17 years to kind of get to a model where we go, wow, this is working. Living incomes are going up, child labour rates in our supply chain now, as I said, typical child labour rate is about 50% even today, 1.5 million children. So 1 in 2 farms you visit, you'll find a case of child labour going on. On our farms, it's less than 4%, and we measure it every year we visit.
How does you get the traceability? How do they get the traceability go? Like, because again, it's like that's...
So again, you implement a system, and we've got a thing called Bean Tracker where every single lot that arrives at every single co-op in return for this premium, they're logging and tagging these bags, and also it's an open system, so we give them, they own that data. So again, it's giving them the power. You're giving farmers the power to run their own little businesses. So we've built the system, but they then use the system to track the data for themselves. We then have full traceability of those beans, and then obviously the bags are tagged. Those bags are brought to port, checked, and all the rest of it. So once you've got that, and then you can trace every single bag back to each farmer. We then go visit each of those farms. We do household visits. We understand the living income of those farms. We understand what's going on from a child labour perspective. We don't shy away from the fact that there's still child labour in our supply chain. We talk about it. The Times wrote a headline of Tony's finds child labour, and we're like, where did you?
I remember in that.
Yeah. But the irony that was sort of missed was, where did they get it from? Our annual report. So it was like, that's not journalism, that's clickbait. We every single year put all these facts and figures in a very detailed report about everything that's going on, what works, what doesn't work. So again, we're showing and removing the objections, removing the fear of change. We're showing that you can scale a brand with this model. We're showing you've got a supply chain that can work at scale. And then we're showing that, that you can build an economically successful company. What we hope that does, and now we've brought other players on, which we'll talk about in a minute, is that it encourages the big guys to go, well, there's nothing to fear from this model. And now that legislation's also coming about traceability, we think that could just be an accelerant for change.
One of my sort of, just by proxy of guests, is this sort of obsession with or learning about systems thinking. So obviously, I've interviewed Henry Dimbleby, who's done Ravenous.
Yep.
The way he describes in that book, systems thinking is really important because it makes you realise that there can be positive reinforcement loops and negatives. And actually, when you, again, kind of like what you've done here, you see the whole system, how it interacts together between your pillars in business. 1 or 2 little changes can have hugely beneficial or hugely negative effects. Again, another guy, Franco Fabini, who's been on, who does Natura, all about the food system in like fruit and veg, like how to get the best quality of product. This David Cleavy guy last week. What were some of the things they did? So I understand the traceability bit. They built the kind of the technology to make it lucidly clear where the beans are coming from. What were some of the things that actually happened to jerk the system, which then meant the kids didn't have to cut the cocoa beans and could actually go to school? Like, what were some of those big things that happened?
Well, I think the fact that we were giving those long-term contracts to people to say, you can sell your beans. So it wasn't a two-way thing, it was a one-way thing. You can sell your beans to the highest bidder, but we will commit to pay this premium to the market price, a living income price that's independently set every year. So we'll be here with this level of, and of course, because we were constantly the highest, effectively payer, they would sell their beans to us. But in return for that, we want to, 1, have the traceability. 2, we will be visiting households and supporting farmers. And there's no resistance to that because farmers don't want their kids in child labour.
Yeah.
So then you're facilitating, once you discover a child labour case, how do you remediate it? You're getting into what is the barrier to that child? Is it that they don't have their school's X miles away? Is it the fact the hours on the thing, then explaining like labour brigades where effectively, instead of the kids doing the work, you would then get young men who were then in their early 20s who didn't have many prospects together to then go farm by farm to do the work that the kids were doing on pruning the trees, or how at harvest do they then be able to afford to hire someone instead of the kids. So it's just, and it's also partly telling the parents that's not right, that is against the law, and they go, encouraging them to understand that, that part of it as well. So it's just there's no one. And that's why this is so hard and why it takes so long, because there's 1,000 learnings every single season, and it's taking those learnings and saying, right, how do we take those 1,000 learnings, and of those 1,000, let's push these 5 things really hard the following year.
It's kind of like, I think it's like nudging theory. So it's trying loads of different things and then seeing what works and then placing your bets. Why I didn't think we were going to link this is that's how you run the business as well.
No, but
it's the same. They work across both things.
Absolutely, and not being afraid of failure. Again, back to we're going to try some stuff that's worked. We're going to try some stuff that people say, oh, but you've done that and it was wrong. Yeah, okay, but we're constantly learning how to sort of get better. And then I guess the big systems change moment, and I give my predecessor Hank Yan a huge amount of credit for this. In 2017, 18, they realized that the model was working and the evidence and the data support it, but they realized we weren't scaling fast enough as a brand to sort of get it to a point where the big guys could look at it and say, yeah, but it doesn't really work at scale. It will never work at scale. So there's sort of skepticism of, yes, you can do it, but only at a micro scale. And so what he said was, I'm confident enough that if I scale this faster, the model will continue to work. And so what they did was effectively say, right, we're going to create Tony's Open Chain, where anybody, our competitors or private label or people who use cocoa outside of sort of chocolate industry can source their beans through us. And as a result, we've got Ben and Jerry's on board sourcing all their cocoa through us. We have many private labels, so Albert Heijn in the Netherlands, in the UK, Waitrose source their cocoa for some of their bars through us. And as you said, on the shelf, you've got Tony's selling with its supposedly unique proposition of ethical cocoa right next to a private label at about X cheaper with a Tony's Open Chain stamp. Why am I okay with that? Because I'm CEO of the mission. I'm not CEO of growing Tony's Chocolonely, a FMCG brand, as big as possible. I'm CEO of the mission, and that serves the mission far better because as a mission-led CEO, proving that I can scale my supply chain model and therefore convincing some of the big guys to adopt that model for themselves will drive, my mission to end exploitation in cocoa faster. So I'll live with when I say people equally unhappy, yeah, I've got some of the sales guys going, well, it's really hard to sell Tony's when Waitrose private labels next door with the Tony's Open Chain logo on it saying with the same ethical proposition. I said, well, if we're only relying on our ethical proposition to sell, we ain't got a business anyway. So, Tony's is a different thing. It's chunky, it's delicious, it's kind of everything that it is. So's Waitrose private label, its thing. If we're both ethical, I think that then drives a really interesting question. How come Waitrose private label can afford it, and yet that's not fully implemented through the big supply chains?
What are some of those other bits of making people equally unhappy? Because I think it's so, when you say it's so true, it's like if a sales like, how am I going to compete with own label? But we're now sort of coming to this where I want it to get to is how this does link to the purpose and the bigger mission is one of those things, but it makes total sense. The way you're detailing. Yeah, and what are some of those other equally unhappiness, but it builds for the mission?
Yeah, I'm just struggling to think of a specific thing now, but I think, as you said, the kind of the tensions that I always sort of face day to day are we investing enough in the brand? Are we investing enough in Tony's Open Chain? And there's, as I said, every year there's 1,000 ideas how we could make it better, and I have to pick the 5 that I think will make the biggest difference. There's 1,000 ideas on how we can grow the brand in the US, and I can't afford all of them, so you have to pick the 5. So because otherwise, I'm not short of ideas. I've got millions and millions of ideas, and I would be bankrupt if I went after all of them. So just the biggest tensions, the most starkest is that one where we've got private label with Tony's Open Chain on it. And selling right next door to a bar of Tony's chocolate, we've effectively given away our USP, which in branding terms or FMCG kind of building a brand terms would seem to be madness. But I don't.
What's it done for sales?
I don't care about that. My sales haven't been affected. So I know the sales guys say, when they launch this, you can see it in the data. Yeah. I'm growing in the UK massively. I'm growing in the Netherlands. We're growing the company hugely. So I can look past the micro data to say this is good. From a Waitrose point of view, we have them on when we do open day things. I have the Waitrose guys stand up and say, this has been brilliant. Our rate of sales gone up by 20% since we've put this logo on it. This is really good for us, and we believe in this. So guess what? It also creates a really tight bond between us and Waitrose or us and Albert Heijn. So when it comes to range reviews and whatever, yes, they're different sides of the business, but there's a kind of understanding that we're in partnership. And so whilst they continue to be brutal, because they are, that's the way, that's the sales guys, the buyers there are supposed to be like that. I'm convinced that gives me innate
It's positive unintended consequences, I suppose. And also, I suppose there's more brand visibility in some respects on the shelf.
Exactly. And there's more brand visibility that must be a good thing.
Yeah.
Right? And I'm not building the Tony's Open Chain brand, so it's per se, but yeah, there's a belief that that's a good thing. So for me, it's all massively positive reinforcement. And I, again, look to what am I making my decisions about? And it starts, we talked right at the beginning about that single page that I show. That is my decision-making page. Am I making...
Just quickly, what's on that and how can...
Mission, vision, values. And literally...
What's the difference in mission and vision?
So mission is what do I want to achieve? So I want to end exploitation in cocoa, and the sort of mission is how I go about it. So it's my sort of 5-year plan, and then my kind of 3 sort of key pillars that we've sort of consistently have of, create awareness of the problem, lead by example, inspire others to act. So it's kind of like how you go about, it's kind of, why, what, and then how is the values. So you kind of have those 3 things. It's all on one page. That's my CEO decision-making sheet. Do I think, though it's not hit 400 million of turnover, it's not hit 27% margin, it's like, am I delivering against those? Does this individual decision ladder up to that in the right way? So when I've got a sales guy going, we'd be mad to put that logo, give that logo to Waitrose, I go, if I want to end exploitation in cocoa, I need to convince the big guys to come with me. I'm only going to do that at scale. I won't do that enough just with the brand itself. Let's bring others in.
Wow, a couple more things, then we'll wrap this up. I've just got some questions I've been burning to ask. But do you know what the genesis story is of the uneven chocolate? Like how that came as in...
Yeah, so again, to my predecessor, Heng Yan, when he came into the business in kind of 2010, 2011, again, challenger brand thinking of how do we articulate the unevenness, the inequality in the supply chain? And one of the ideas was, well, let's make the bar uneven to exactly that, to very clearly articulate that point. And so they did that. And again, it was one of those sort of tipping point moments. Now, the great thing about it is it's a bit of a Marmite thing. People either love it or they hate it. And they're like, oh, it breaks unevenly. You're doing it to make me eat more chocolate. You're doing it. And it's like, brilliant. Whether you hate it,
really,
we're going to have a conversation about this. Why do you do that, Tony? Like, it's so annoying. I love Tony's, but this is really annoying. And you might look at that consumer data and say, oh, well, we've got to solve that problem. I'm like, over my dead body are we solving that problem? Because that creates the conversation as to why we do it. Because of the inequality, people go, oh, right, I didn't know that. Oh, wow, that's cool. Yes. So again, it's points of disruption, points of inefficiency. What creates people getting out of their 1-second decision-making, well, this is what I do every day and my brain's too busy to think about other things. When you have devices like that, that's why with the advent calendars, likewise, when we took one of the chocolates out of the advent calendar, it caused such a storm. It's like, you're taking the chocolate away from the children. Yeah. And it was like, yeah, but we're now having a conversation about why we did that. And when you explain that to angry mothers that Johnny didn't get a chocolate, they go, oh, well, that's a really good lesson for my child to learn, actually, and I'll talk to them about that. And anyway, what we learned, the first year we did it, we didn't put an extra, the next year we learned and we put 2 chocolates the next day to kind of quell the...
Interesting. So it's like when almost like problems become or bugs become features. When you talk about just quickly on that conversation bit, it's like, how do you think brands should enter the conversation? Like what, I know you've almost said like the uneven bar, like I think because conversation is culture on a micro level, right? But it's like, how do you think brands should enter that? Or
I think my view is if you're really clear on your mission, your purpose, be very kind of thoughtful and vocal about how you enter the conversation around those spaces. I think the danger that's happened over the last 10 years is companies are expected to comment on everything. And then there's traps sort of everywhere because one, you start speaking from a lack of experience or a lack of knowledge. You make a decision on something. So I think be thoughtful about what you want to talk about, principally, hopefully in line with your kind of purpose, mission, what you stand for as a company. And then how do all the devices in the company kind of put their hand out and say, provoke a conversation. Not in a, that's a very simple way to provoke a conversation. Why do you do that? Now I'm in a conversation with you. That's annoying. Well, it's annoying, but it's not nearly as annoying as 1.5 million children working in child labour. It allows you to kind of have a thought-provoking conversation with people about what is the one less chocolate in your advent calendar really isn't the end of the world compared to what some children going through to bring that cocoa to your doorstep every Christmas.
It's again, I always pick up one like key principle from every guest, and with you Douglas, it's all this contrarian thinking, which is, problems, the unevenness of chocolate actually becoming, or bugs, I should say, becoming features. Actually, like, this is the point, and then it allows you to enter the conversation, the advent calendar thing. Just quite exciting. These all behind us for people listening. There's like a whole wall of different branded, gifted, almost like corporate gifting chocolate bars. Like you've got the Brat Summer, you've got Monzo, you've got like tons of brands. What did that do for the business? Because that almost feels like one of those small bets that it seems to. I looked on your website. I would have, again, probably thought, like, would that take off? But it's like, I'd love to know, like, how, because it's on your website, it's quite centre, isn't it? Like,
yeah, so obviously on the website, again, because it's more of the sort of direct to
sure. Okay, yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah, but at the same time, so e-com in general is about a 30 million turnover part of our business. So it's big. It's a big chunk of the business, and it's effectively, principally personalized bars. So whether as an individual you can go on the website and do it for your wedding or for your friend's birthday, and you can personalize with their name and all the rest of it. Again, we've managed to get that right, and because our brand is something that people feel good about gifting, so it's the combination of being able to enable it in an interesting way, so you can do your own designs and upload your designs, or you get AI to do it for you or whatever, as well as that's more than just a chocolate bar because Tony says something.
That's so true. That's one of your competitors couldn't do that.
And exactly. So it's the blend of, it's sort of quite a cool design tool, plus it's Tony's. So it sort of has an elevated value in terms of it's an expensive chocolate bar on the face of it. Similarly for companies, what we do is something they can design for an event, for a launch, whatever it may be. We, obviously there's a certain amount of Tony's branding on it. For us, it's fantastic paid sampling, right? So I get a good margin, and probably 5,000 people of which 3,500 have never tasted Tony's before go, this is damn good chocolate. And
also the first interaction with the brand is you're being gifted, which is like...
Yeah, they've been gifted, and on the inside is then the story about the mission. And so from, again, when you're a challenger brand and you haven't got a lot of marketing budget, getting other people to pay your chocolate for your chocolate and give it away is a pretty powerful marketing tool. And so you make money to do marketing.
Wow.
So again...
Any other examples of that?
No, I'm not. I mean, no. I mean, that's obviously the sort
but like that sort of thinking of...
Yeah, I just... I think we've probably touched on a lot of them in terms of where you show up and all the rest of it. I think the thing to remember, though, is that in any of these stories, there's just a huge amount of luck as well. So you go back to the founding story, the design, and we haven't talked about it, but our design on shelf is fundamental to our success. It cuts through. That happened. That design brief wasn't for a shelf. It was for a TV show. It was like, give me something interesting. It was written to say, given to a guy and said, you've got 3 days because we're filming next week. And so the kind of core Tony's red bar design that we have today that stood the test of time wasn't like thought through from a million angles for, does it, can you see it from left or right? It was thought through to say, you've got 2 days and I need
so it was just going to be for a TV program?
Yeah, it was for a gimmick launch. As part of this documentary, they were doing a sort of effectively a gimmick launch alongside the launch of the Willy Wonka film with Johnny Depp back in 2005, when Nestle were launching their bar. They were launching it as a stunt to sell it at a market stall alongside that. And then the thick bars came about because they were literally ringing up, and you can see it on the documentary, ringing up, like, we need 1,000 bars made by this time next week. And the 50th person that called, they said, well, all I've got is this chunky, thick mold.
Wow.
And they were like, yeah, done. Like, as long as you make them by Friday. So then you get this design that was knocked up in 2 minutes. Tony's Chocolonely came about because they went as part of the documentary to go see Ben and Jerry's, and they said, well, the guy in front of the camera was called Tone, and they said, well, if you want to be an international brand, if you're doing it properly, it should be Tony's, not Tone, because that's very Dutch. And then Chocolonely is the chocolate industry, but the lonely journey to solve inequality. So all of these things were thought up in the first 7 days to make it look cool for a TV show, and yet it's turned out to be absolute incredible for an FMCG brand on shelf, where the branding's very unapologetic. It completely breaks every category code.
How so? Does it? Because I thought...
Yeah, because if you look at our colours, like having rainbows, like Cadbury, everything's purple, everything's the same. Our colours are all over the place. So, and same in every single market, we have a rainbow on shelf that completely stands out, and it's worked so hard where we've had no marketing money, and all of those things weren't thought through. So sometimes take the luck as well, accept that there's going to be a huge amount of luck in this as well. Because the chunky bar wasn't I
didn't realise the chunky bar
wasn't how do we differentiate. It was like, what can we make by Friday? That then became a feature. It wasn't through some intellectual thought through.
No, this is really important, because I think there's again, especially opposite a global CEO, is the fact that the appreciation of luck. But I think luck you create your own luck as well. It's like the hard graft. I really believe it does come.
Yes, but
I believe in that sort of stuff as well.
Absolutely, so do I.
Yeah.
But when you get them, one, don't try and post-rationalise that was all your brilliant thinking. Just say that was good, and then freaking double down on it, big time. The fact that we sell incredibly well in Australia, where none of us have actually even been to Australia. It's through a distributor. We've spent no marketing money there yet, and we've got national listings in Coles and Woolworths. Why? Because the packaging's working so hard on shelf to kind of stand out and create a point of difference. So it's and then it's a great product. So back to good branding, luck or otherwise. Great product, clear mission, clear decision making. That's what brings all of this together and allows you to this is iteration. Everyone thinks bold strategy. We made this one big choice. You're making 1,000 choices every year and filtering out the noise to then say, right, these are the things that we're backing because those are the ones that are working. That's what this is about.
We've got to wrap this up. You've got to train. Final question. I ask this to all guests, and I think with our contrarian thinking today, it'll be interesting. But what's one truth you believe that most people would disagree with you on?
That I don't believe in simplify to amplify.
Okay.
I believe that you by adding a certain amount of complexity in your business, you will ultimately move faster, and choosing how you filter complexity is a better strategy than simplifying to amplify.
Absolute joy.